Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, I want to continue our build collection run through as we continue on to character 4, the last character of my main account. We still have character 5, which is the main character of my second account to go through after this though. And on this, we'll go through and discuss every build on this character, which is 4.01 all the way to 4.16. And as we go through, I'm going to explain what the build is for, how often I end up using it, and also how hard it is to put together. As of course, the build collection itself is not per se clear in what the builds are for per se. In the recommended build list, we try to give some recommendations and make sure that the builds that are worth having are in there. But there's a lot of other builds in the collection that aren't per se fully designed to be recommended outright, but they might fit certain playstyles. So in here, we're going to go through one by one, explain them, and give basically my ideas and basically the way to kind of play it and why we went the way we did about them. In doing so, hoping to pass some information and some knowledge along. Everything will be timestamped down below, so you can jump to a specific build if that is your interest. Let's go get started. And as with all of these videos, we'll give a brief introduction to the build collection for those maybe unfamiliar with it. The build collection will be linked down below. It will take you to this Google Drive folder, which contains a bunch of files, and mostly they are build pictures that you can copy entire builds from. There's also a recommended build list and a recommended weapons and talent list at the top there, and those can help at least guide a little bit, because for the rest of it, it is laid out actually as the loadouts of my characters. So for instance, here we'll be going through character 4, which will be 4.01 all the way to 4.16. The 4 point is the character number, so we have 3 point, 2 point, 1 point, and then later on as well 5 point. And then the number after the dot, 0.1 to 0.16, is of course the amount of loadout slots we have. So effectively, all of these are just the loadout slots as I have them in the game, and it's represented as a whole build picture here so that you can copy from there. And everything will be linked down below, so you can jump to the specific build picture, and of course also timestamped, so you can go to a specific one if you care so to do so. And here we'll be covering 4.01 to 4.16. And let's go start with 4.01. And here we have on 4.01 a negotiator. On the first slot of most of my characters is kind of their signature build. And this is kind of the signature build of this character. Negotiator is a gear set that I enjoy quite a lot. It has a very specific playstyle where you try to mark multiple enemies. And of course, any crit damage done to any of those enemies will spread across them. And that makes it so that you want to always be in the back of your head thinking about marking multiple enemies so you can get the most out of it. With Negotiator, most of the time, I'm going to take it without the chest. The chest increases it from 3 to 5 marks. In most gameplay, you won't be able to get 5 marks going. And of course, as well, having a chest talent to give up a chest talent that is going towards damage for that can cost more than you can gain from that. So I set it up as the 3 mark version, and we do definitely take the backpack nowadays. Ever since they increased it to be 100% on the crit damage spread to 112% on the crit damage spread, it has been the go-to. I generally basically don't run a vigilance variant of these anymore. And even in the recommended folder for the negotiators, I've actually taken to remove those. This we're showing as the Tinkerer variant. There is also a Negotiator recommended folder in the build collection all the way at the top, which contains several different negotiators in there. As nowadays, actually, I used to have a Negotiator as well on character 5. I've taken to remove that one, mostly because I just wanted to have other builds choices there, as we'll see when we get to character 5. But Negotiator definitely worth considering, and I do have actually multiple variants still, but just not full red ones, multiple ones of. We do have a Tech Tank in the collection on character 2. We have a TurDro hybrid on character 1. Here we're setting it up in the full red version, and then with this one showing it with the Tinkerer. Now, of course, as with most of these builds, and let's go to the character for that, I have it saved, and this has been a repeated thing I do with loadouts for myself, and this is then the first one for this character, so we'll explain it here again. I mostly save these builds as 5 pieces, and the loadout itself is then saved as 5 pieces, but of course I don't tend to run it as 5 pieces, because that would be a dumb thing to do. That would be just wasteful. But because of this, we can either go to the glove slot, stick in an OverDogs here. OverDogs, of course, a really potent exotic, and just for general play would actually be my go-to. Or we'd stick in that Tinkerer that we had on the build picture, or I can even forego either of those and, for instance, go 2-piece unit alloys, or stick in a Fox's Prayer and take a rifle or something. Negotiator is basically agnostic about what weapon types it uses. So because of that, we can actually take it with most things. It also doesn't care too much about RPM. You still want to have some RPM there, not too slow of a firing weapon, because you want to crit some of the enemies and be able to at least mark them somewhat consistently and quickly. So something like a classic M1A might have a little bit too low of a fire rate to just land multiple shots, because on average, you would need 2 shots to mark an enemy. You have 60% chance of marking them effectively by hitting them with a crit. So yeah, and then here, as we see, actually, I have it saved with 1 AR and 1 rifle. That's to have this rifle that I can carry around with it, because I actually do enjoy Negotiator, for instance, for rifles or LMGs or other weapon types as well. If I do take it with the Tinkerer, as we have it there, of course, this character has in their inventory other ARs that I can bring in, and we can pair it up to have, for instance, combination here of Killer and Measured. If we take it back to the build picture here, recommended talents for here are, any of the ones that we generally see of Killer, Measured, Streamline, and Ranger are really good weapon talents. Especially with Tinker, of course, we're making it 2 talents that we pick out of that list. Killer, Measured is my go-to. Another one I enjoy a lot as well is Killer plus Fast Hands, as Fast Hands can help our reloads quite a bit. Preservation is also always a good consideration. And yeah, nowadays, if we are taking it with Obliterate, which I am here as general play, generally I'm going to go with Obliterate on the chest. We are taking, of course, the Equalizer. In the past, this would be sometimes, depending on layout, either a Cheska or a Grupo chest with Obliterate. Nowadays, of course, if we are going Obliterate, we are going to take that Equalizer. We can also go Sacrifice, we can go Perfect Glass. Of course, uptime-wise, that is much better. On the damage end of things, it doesn't need to stack up. But of course, it comes with its own downside of having that incoming damage be there. So overall, yeah, going Glass, definitely an option here. Going other exotics like the Coyote or the OverDogs, or of course even Centurion or Exodus or Nimble or any of the potent ones works at. I wouldn't per se go Memento with Negotiator, as we talked about. Negotiator, definitely, its backpack is now really good. The only place I, of course, do go with a Memento still, though, is the TechTank variant. But there we're going a TechTank first and a Negotiator kind of second. So yeah, the TechTank side of things does need that Memento. But if you want to, for instance, stick a Memento in a red build, which is quite a popular thing to always do in, for instance, Strikers or other builds, yeah, something like Strikers would work out to be a better choice than this. Here we do give up quite a lot if we don't go with that backpack. Overall, Negotiator is well worth having. It is a pretty enjoyable gear set. It has a mechanic that is a little bit different than everything else. We're trying to mark multiple enemies and then spread the damage around, trying to keep in the back of our head of like, okay, I want to mark that one, and then shoot one big target to kind of spread out. And then also, oh, I've killed the other things now, I should mark new things. So that, because of that, it has its own unique kind of playstyles. That's what I enjoy about it. Keeping it here in its red form, it is a red core set, so it isn't too hard to get together. We mostly go with pieces that already have high weapon damage, preferably, and then put in some crit chance or crit damages alongside of it. Negotiator already comes with its own crit chance as its second stat, and because of that, yeah, we don't need much of it on the gear. Another choice we could make here is just to, for instance, put in 1 or 2 blues. That is not too big of a loss, and especially solo can help out a little bit, especially when paired with a shield. As a red build, it can go with any specialization, really, and generally we do want a Revive Hive, but then we pair that with some useful skill. That can be a Pulse, that can be Foam, that can be Decoy, that can be Smart Cover, that can be a Shield. Anything that kind of works out and gives you some utility. Definitely a build type worth considering, especially if you're looking for a little bit of a different style of red build. Negotiator at 3 stacks can be very competitive. It can reach the levels at 3 stacks if you consistently keep up 3 stacks, with it's one of the few competitors to Chest Striker. In actual play, most of the time, if you try to keep 2 stacks up or more, it can actually, it can fare well even against an Obliterate Striker. The only downside is its single target damage is quite a bit lower, and sometimes you're just locked into that. Sometimes there is just one target. And because of that, it isn't always, it isn't considered one of the metas. But it is definitely powerful enough to be ran and well worth considering. And we go to 4.02, and on the 0.02 slots on all of my characters is their Strikers on that second slot. Striker is effectively a build that I need on every character just to be able to do everything on them. And that's also why it's so highly recommended. It is the go-to all-rounder, the general meta of this game, is to take an Obliterate Striker out. You can set it up in different ways. Here we're showing it, for instance, with the Tinkerer, where we're taking 2 ARs with it to, of course, get that second talent going. That is what the Tinkerer will do. In the collection as well, we have it set up with Coyote, with Overdogs, and yeah, always having all of those options open to us is actually how I have it saved. Here on this build picture, we see it, yeah, with the Equalizer. Definitely, you want to have the option as well to go to a Chest Striker. For general play, getting to 100 stacks, even with just using an AR and not stacking with an ACS, which can, for instance, get us more stacks more quickly. This Obliterate one is a general meta because we can just get there more consistently, and because of that, it is kind of the go-to. But there are situations, and specifically places, some content. Incursion is basically the prime example for it, where we take a Chest Striker instead. With a Chest Striker, we need to get to 200 stacks. We can do so with an ACS, especially because shotguns count per pellet, and ACS fires pretty quickly. Each pellet or each shot is 8 pellets, and for the purposes of Striker, it counts each pellet. So an ACS with 300 RPM, even though actually it would have 20% more RPM, but the base 300 RPM is 2,400 pellets per minute. That means that, yeah, we can kind of stack up pretty quickly with that. And then especially with a Chest Striker, we would also need to do that. With an Obliterate Striker like we have here, we don't need to. And Chest Striker, generally, we consider it, if you can stay above 150 stacks, so 75% of the bar filled with a Chest Striker, you have to be consistently above that for it to be worth it. Otherwise, you go with an Obliterate Striker. But as we go into the game, what we see is actually, again, yeah, it is saved as 5 pieces to give me the options. Just because I'm on that character showing it as a Tinkerer variant doesn't mean I actually only want the Tinkerer variant here. Of course, the general go-to is, I would say again, Overdogs. I have that option, of course, here. And the build is set up that I can slot in any of these exotics as I want. Especially with Strikers, yeah, we want to have all of the options open, even the chest, because the chest is also a good piece. And the backpack is a general go-to, especially to open up exotic options. We could go with a Vigilance backpack and actually sacrifice Vigilance. Can be a decent pick for Striker, but generally I don't do that anymore because I generally take the chest and then an exotic. Those are bigger combos than Vigilance. But I also have the chest on each and every character, meaning that on every character, I have all 6 pieces, and that opens up all the options. And yeah, we can, with this, of course, yeah, for instance, bring in here an Cheska that I have actually just in this holster slot for bringing it in with the Chest Striker. On the Chest Striker, we want to go with Cheska as the piece that comes in, the high-end piece. And then, yeah, for instance, we can go Overdogs now, or we can go Tinkerer as well here. I have it saved with 2 ARs that are already set up for that, of course. But if I go, for instance, with something like Overdogs and I don't need it to be a non-named AR, I will likely swap this out to the Lexington that they have as well here, bringing that in, or maybe taking one of the exotics, because there are several ARs that are also good on the exotic end. An Elmo is perfectly fine, and a Bighorn is actually pretty strong. Strega situationally can be good as well. And we bring that in, and then, yeah, especially with the Chest Striker, we want to go with, if you have a stack broker, but we don't have that many of those yet. But then, as you can see, I have a whole selection of ACSs, a rock and roll, a lefty, or just an ACS 12. Each of them has their own benefits. The ACSs and the sack brokers, they only have 160 stacks basically in their magazine. A rock and roll does have 240 before it needs to reload. So yeah, it can be quite useful to have a rock and roll, especially for the 200 stack variants, but you can get by without as well. So we have all of our options available to us, and that is actually important with Striker. The Strikers is the thing that I grab when we need to get shit done. I've repeated this already a few times, but yeah, when the going gets tough, the tough grab their Strikers. And yeah, that is somewhat not the greatest thing out of a balance perspective. Striker still definitely is the top meta build. But nowadays, at least it has some competition. On the obliterate end of things, things like CoCo and things like tipping skills can compete. Negotiator and Umbra could always already compete with it in sets things. For instance, Negotiator if you have consistently multiple marks, and Umbra especially because it can, for instance, with its ambush mechanics, can actually start much higher than Striker can, but Striker can get you up pretty quickly. On this build picture, yeah, everything's set up in red, and that means that it is also pretty easy to get together. That's also why it is a general recommended and also the first recommended on the build collection's recommended build list. And that is because you just need to get 4 pieces of Striker together. And honestly, at that point, with just some high ends and a decent enough weapon, you could jump into challenging and get by. Of course, optimizing everything up, getting it all set up correctly, getting an equalizer in there and some of the exotics and then good weapons to go with that. Yeah, that leaves you going into heroic and beyond. Overall, one of the most recommended builds and worth having. If nothing else, you want to have one just to use it in the moments that it is needed, that if you're doing something harder, usually, especially in a group setting, this would be the go-to for it. For solo play, don't be afraid to, for instance, also put a few blue cores in here or just stick a memento in there just for a little bit of survivability. But on the long terms, if I want that survivability, I'm just going to lean towards the tech tanks that we've already seen, and we'll see, for instance, a Heartbreaker one on this character that I have there. If I'm playing solo, that's more the builds I kind of go for. This for group settings and in Countdown and other content as retaliations in group settings and such. You kind of need this. This is the true, just general meta that most of the team should be running. And then preferably, for instance, in Legendary and such, they are supported with, for instance, one Foam Eclipse there, making their job easier. That is the go-to for getting some of the harder content done. For Legendary, my go-to is, yeah, just Strikers on 3 people and 1 person running a Foam Eclipse. Failing that, some form of healer could work well as well. Overall, you owe it to yourself to put one of these together, if nothing else, so you know what the top-end build in the game feels like. Even if you don't enjoy its playstyle, having tried it out a little bit will make you understand why it is the top meta. And then on 4.03, on most of the 0.03s on my characters, I have a high-end build, and here it is, of course, the same. On other characters, we have already seen, for instance, the Pestilence build, which is the Langmo setup for the Pestilence. That can be, for instance, a really good high-end build. On several others, we have talked about that the high-ends really don't compete against the gear sets much anymore. That is true here as well. With 2-piece unit alloys that we have gotten from this season, this has improved a little bit in comparison to what it used to be. But not by enough to, be competitive really with these high-ends are basically not competitive against a lot of the gear sets. For comparison, for instance, a Striker now with especially its perfect obliterate, because it has also gained that, of course, versus this with unit alloys, 2-piece unit alloys on this, increasing its damage a little bit. At around 50 stacks, the obliterate Striker starts beating this with the same overdogs alongside of it, starts beating this glass high-end. And because of that, Striker can get to 50 stacks really quickly. That is halfway, and then of course it has 50 stacks to go to get even more damage over this. There are still some places where this considered that this is a good idea. I think actually that those places, especially for instance raids and such where that gets brought up, they just, I would think that maybe nowadays, although the thing would be you would need multiple builds to kind of compete with this, because this can just be a standard all around, will work for everything and will do its damage. It doesn't have any stacking to it. It can lose its vigilance, but it doesn't have any stacking mechanics to it, and that can be the strength of it. But for instance, Umbra can stack anywhere and can stand up out of cover and do a lot more damage than this. A lot more damage than this. Because of that, yeah, I consider these kind of, yeah, an elegant weapon from a bygone age, but also not as strong as just, yeah, blasters. This setup, as we have it here, is set up to be with the sacrifice. When we're taking the sacrifice, the gift becomes a really good option. The sacrifice is generally available in all of the loot pools. You can just farm Providence for it, and then you get that. Gift, though, is not in that same general Providence targeted loot pool. It is one of the so-called DZ/PvP items, as I call them. Some people call them DZ exclusives. They are not exclusive to the DZ, so just because of that confusion, I tend to not call them that. Most people will get these through named caches. You can also get the blueprints from the reconstructed caches for all of the named items, of course, including the whole DZ set. Sometimes they're also even on the countdown third slot of that vendor that sometimes sells DZ items. But the DZ items are somewhat harder to get because you can't just farm, for instance, in target loot in Countdown or just in the open world and such for this. But you could also replace this with a Cheska backpack with normal vigilance. The only difference between normal and perfect vigilance is that perfect vigilance comes back 1 second faster after 3 seconds after being hit. Normal vigilance comes back after 4 seconds after it's been hit. 1 extra second is not a complete game changer, not in the same way that, for instance, perfect glass. Generally, if we are going glass, we're going to go perfect glass because that 5% extra that we get on the talent really does make a difference. Here, of course, we're not getting extra damage, just a shorter duration before it comes back. Because of that, that can be replaced. Just a normal Providence backpack or, for instance, Cheska would be the same bonus, as we're taking this as the second piece of Providence for that 8% crit chance that it has. Here, though, even though we've dropped crit damage quite a bit, Fox's Prayer is still the go-to in this setup, even though on the other one, where we were running unit alloys together with just the Equalizer, the high-end Obliterate variant of a similar build that we saw in Character 3, there we were choosing to go Cheska and Grupo, and that is because we were dropping our crit chance just below kind of the threshold that Fox's Prayer beats out Cheska or Grupo. Here, it is still a little bit ahead, mostly as well as we are still getting effectively that 8% crit chance that we have here through the gift. And laying it up-wise, crit-wise, actually, Cheska doesn't fit in well, so we'd have to go Grupo. And Grupo just barely doesn't beat Fox's Prayer on the AR. And then, of course, this Fox's Prayer actually helps out with my secondary here with a rifle. Because these kind of setups can be good for any weapon type. We could have basically anything here. With a glass one, I would want a little bit of distance. SMGs wouldn't be my choice, but yeah, ARs, LMGs, and especially rifles as well fit in good on these type of builds. And we do want to have a split weapon system as just, if we run out of ammo here, we can just move on to the rifle or, for instance, an SMG or an LMG. If we take it into onto the character just to see the build itself, we see actually that it is saved a little bit differently. Here we have 3 pieces of unit alloys and one of them being in that glove slot. This again to kind of give me options because yeah, with this we could take different exotics than we saw there. We can take overdogs, but we can also take things like Tinkerer or Coyote or Centurion or basically any again of those exotics. Even a Memento could go into here. Because of that, I have it saved up like this, and then yeah, I can always bring in the overdogs if I want to have that. But also I can even run it with this 3-piece because we of course from that get this extra mag size. And actually, with the high-ends, I feel that's maybe the thing that they can do a little bit, where we go for the extra mag size. The third piece here is kind of cheaper than, for instance, when we would try to do it with the gear set. With a gear set, really the only way to get to that third piece unit alloys is to take the Ninja Bike, of course. When we take that Ninja Bike, we're giving up the backpack talent, and that costs a lot. Here, of course, we don't need to take the Ninja Bike. We don't need to give up a backpack talent to get those 3 pieces with this high-end. So I feel that's the thing that the high-ends then can do. And then what I was considering, but I haven't implemented, and likely I won't per se implement, because overall these builds are not, to me, high priority. I take them sometimes, and most of the time it's just like, oh, how quaint. the good old times. Remember back in the day when this was our top build. And not, for instance, think, for instance, nowadays with tipping skills and strikers and even concentrated company and other very powerful builds being way ahead of this. It's kind of quaint to go back to simpler times, even with new additions like the unit alloys in there. But yeah, that's not a good recommendation, of course. We don't drive around in cars from the 1950s and go like, oh, this is great. This is better than the comfort of air conditioning and soft seats and airbags and seat belts that don't throw you out of the window. That rant aside, if we go back to the picture, yeah, it is kind of easy enough to put together. These are red pieces that we're keeping mostly red. The names aren't too hard to get, with the exception of that gift, but that gift can be replaced. We do definitely want to go sacrifice. If we're going glass, we're going that route. We already saw an obliterate version where we're taking basically a 3-piece of unit alloys, and then this piece becomes the equalizer instead. So you can lay it out like that if you want that kind of playstyle instead. It does fit all weapon types, so we can go with many choices there, but of course, yeah, AR is one of our straight up go-tos. Not per se highly recommended, as we kind of joked about there, but still they do have their place and might be worth considering just to kind of get a feel for, again, a bygone time where this was the top build. And we come to 404, build not found. No, it is a measured assembly, of course. And this will be actually one of the upcoming build showcases that we'll go through, is going to be with FIs and MAs, as we'll go over full healers. And this is truly one of the full healers of the game, especially set up like this, where we're taking it with a lot of repair skills and some skill haste alongside of it. And we're pointing it all towards being a healer that can actually heal quite a lot in comparison to, for instance, combat medics, or even things like Red FI or such. This can actually, for instance, this could heal a raid. Now, usually we, of course, stick a FI there, especially for the bonuses that it has. The benefits of MA is that it can actually disable a lot of mechanical things, especially proxies. This can delete mini tanks, for instance, in some fights. And actually, as one of the notable ones in the Lovebirds fight in the Incursion, it can actually delete the drone at the end, which is a very admirable trait. The one thing I wish they would do for Measured Assembly, as it can delete drones that come into the range of either of its skills, as that is the thing that, one of the things that Measured Assembly does is remove proxies that get within the range of either the Hive or the smart cover that it has. But it doesn't remove, for instance, grenades and such. The way that last season's Batter Up, if you were hit by an airburst or such, it would just get eaten by Batter Up. That was one of the strongest passives, I feel, that we've had, defensive passives at least, that we've had in forever. And I would love for them to kind of roll that into Measured Assembly. That would help quite a lot if it could also take care of grenades getting into the range. Overall, Measured Assembly is pretty strong. If you take the chest, you make it that you overcharge more often, because depending on how many people are within your Hive and your smart cover, you will overcharge. You will get skill tiers and you will overcharge. The chest helps with that. The backpack makes it so that you delete things more often, so that for instance, instead of every 10 seconds, every second, you remove a proxy that is within the range of your skills. That situationally can definitely be a choice, and that's also why we have an alternate setup shown here, where we're taking Ferocious Calm and then that backpack. For general play, and that's kind of usually how I set up my build pictures, is for general play. I don't tend to prefer that backpack because we can have very powerful talents there instead, of course. Things like Hermano, things like Opportunistic, for general play will work out much better because we are still deleting things once in a while, just not as much. And then the chest giving us overcharge quite often, especially when that feeds into the smart cover, is pretty strong. If we take it into the game, though, we can see actually that, again, as a lot of these builds are, it is saved with 5 pieces. All surrounding that BTSU glove, I'm always going to take that BTSU glove. That is a very strong tool, especially as the gear set itself as well wants you to have a hive. We can pair that with the BTSU glove to have an overcharge, and then even here, of course, if we have enough allies in range of us, we can make that a supercharge, as it overcharges the entire team if we are 6 skill tiers. Now, the way that works is, depending on how many ally agents are within the range of our skills, we gain skill tiers, and then this set as well will overcharge us. The thing is, though, the set itself will only overcharge us, but with the BTSU data glove, we can overcharge the entirety of the team, especially in a raid setting, or for instance in countdown or such. That is, of course, 7 other players. That's really strong. I am taking the 5 piece, of course, to give myself the options that I want to have. So for instance, here I do have the backpack at the ready, as we added there with the perfect overclock. I also even have a setup here ready with perfect opportunistic, so either of those could go in. But also I could keep the backpack if we want to have that very quick removal of enemy proxies and such. We'll take the backpack, and then instead we would take the Ferocious Calm that I have here at the ready as well. So giving myself the options of how I want to set it up. And in most of these cases, we're taking it with 2 blue cores, and then effectively I am not taking it also with Technician. I am taking it with Survivalist for that outgoing healing. And then I'm relying that there's at least going to be 2 allies within my skills. And that should be doable, I feel. 2 out of the 3 allies in a 4-man team should be at least, one of them I'll throw a hive under, the other will put a smart cover under, and that should cover me enough. And then if we are in that form, we will overcharge, and especially I do like that chest, as it does apply our overcharge more often. And especially just having that BTSU data glove is a no-brainer to me, and I want to always have that option. That's why we either take the chest or the backpack, just to open up that slot. We could also go with, for instance, Ferocious Calm, and then for instance Hermano or the setup. We would be foregoing the BTSU data glove, and I really like this as a tool, especially if we are going with hive anyway, because the gear set likes having that hive already. Going back to the build picture, the way that we have it set up there is one of the pretty easy ways of getting a healer together. FI, as counter to this, what it does especially is buff the team with total weapon and total skill damage, increasing their damage when they are at full armor. That one generally gets used more because that buff is pretty strong. We don't need really strong healing in this game. What we definitely want is enough healing to take care of things that this build does this too. FI does that as well. And then we want to buff or in other ways help the team. Now, in the case of FI, it buffs through damage, and then usually as well, we have the same choices of backpack talents of either going setup or Hermano, and then, for instance, sledging enemies and scorpioing enemies, and for instance, having smart cover there to give even more damage to our allies. In the case of Measured Assembly, we're giving up only just that group buff total weapon damage, total skill damage that it has, and instead we're deleting some of the proxies that are around, and especially, for instance, deleting mini-tanks, deleting turrets, and deleting incoming drones and such can actually be pretty strong. And then we're, can basically provide the same set of other things in the sledge, in the Scorpio, in the Hermano, in the setup, and the smart cover, of course. So it is between those two. I feel Measured Assembly in some fights can be much more consistent, but FI will consistently be faster. So that is the considerations there. Measured Assembly is definitely worth considering. It is pretty easy to put together, especially because here, getting those skill tiers through the gear set means we can keep the setup with the blue core, we can keep the Hermano with the blue core, even though we can see that actually I have this coming from a different build in the past where it was with a yellow core already. We could, for instance, just have a Hermano where we have either skill haste or repair skills, put the other skill as other stat there, and we don't need to recore it, because that's of course usually the harder pieces to find. To find these pieces with the right stats so we can record them is usually harder, and then you can forego that even without going Technician. Overall, well worth considering if you are into that playing a full healer kind of play. They are situational because, for instance, on heroic and such, I would never consider really running a build like this. This would be more, for instance, for incursions, raids, or maybe legendary and masters. In heroic, I would much more consider going a combat medic that can do its own damage and still has more than enough healing. Overall, though, pretty easy to put together and can be gotten together to play, for instance, for people that enjoy playing that support role is one of the go-tos. And going on to 4.05, we see this character's Eclipse. As with most characters, they have on the 0.05, they have either an Eclipse or an Eclipse-like build with, like, for instance, character 2 having a refactor that is set up for status effects. On this one, we are showing it as an Eclipse setup for foam, as a foam Eclipse. Here set up with the Creeping Death on a Courier, and then an improvised glove. Eclipse is a really strong gear set where if any status effect applied by the person running this gear set, and that includes their skills, but even, for instance, if we apply it through the Scorpio or our grenade or such, all of those will be, when the enemy dies with that status effect, will be spread around. So the thing that this one especially set up for is to use that foam chem that it has here. And that foam chem will go out. It will already be spread when it hits an enemy in a radius because of the Courier. And that will already spread it right away, and then any enemy killed with it will keep spreading it to further enemies as long as they weren't already foamed, because it won't extend the duration of the foam every time it spreads. It will just, if they aren't foamed at that time, it will foam them if there was still a foam on the person dying. This is one of the go-tos for legendary and even, for instance, master missions for sections. As a running foam, what it does is open up for a few seconds, opens up a gap for the reds to just do all of the damage that they can. Eventually, enemies that are foamed will start shooting back. They will be, confused for a few seconds, but eventually they will gather their senses and start shooting back at us. But those few seconds is generally all we need. And then, it will keep them in place, make them easy targets for our allies. They won't just be jumping into cover. And because of that, this is one of the go-tos, for instance, for clearing legendaries. One of these with 3 generally strikers, but any hard-hitting build alongside of it is our go-to, for instance, for clearing any of the legendaries. And the way that we have it set up here is especially as well. Creeping Death here, while it might not be clear why we also go that Creeping Death, is door boundaries. One of the things is, especially when a wave spawns, we have a door boundary. There is basically an inside to the door and an outside to the door, very obviously, but there's a boundary in between it. So if this side is the enemies inside of the door and this side is the enemies outside of the door, when they're running out and, 2 got out, 2 are still within the door, if we send the foam and we hit the outside of the door, we will only foam these enemies outside. Creeping Death then will spread it all around and will foam everybody there. And because of that, that's important to have Creeping Death. That's the main purpose of Creeping Death, actually. Because otherwise, if we were to foam like that, if it hits the outside, if we don't have Creeping Death, it won't spread. Those other enemies are basically going to run out and start shooting at our allies because they are not foamed. That foam will either hit the outside of the door or the inside of the door, not both. The boundary is always separated. That is also true, for instance, for explosive skills and such, and that's a very important mechanic to understand. Especially in Legendary, that is kind of the way that we play. We try to spawn camp as much as possible, because the second we let the enemies get out and do their thing, we get into trouble. Legendary is pretty easy if you kill faster than they can kill you. That's the main go-to nowadays for clearing out legendaries. And here as well, we're using an improvised glove. We could, of course, we're using it here with a skill haste. Hanayu would be the replacement for this if you don't want to invest in an improvised glove, because Hanayu would be 10% skill haste, but here with the improvised, we're gaining 2% more skill haste by taking a mod that is 12% skill haste. So a minor increase, but also one that I actually don't end up using much. because generally the go-to for me is that we do take the Courier, and then I actually take, again, the BTSU Data Glove. As we discussed, that BTSU Data Glove, especially for resetting hives for allies in Legendary and such, is very strong. I can, of course, also use it with a healing hive then, and I can then do basically a little bit of healing and then also a still strong foam. And that's usually my go-to for it. If we take it into the game, it is actually exactly saved as shown on that build picture, because of course the BTSU that I have is always in my inventory. But as stated, even though I have it here saved with foam and EMP, one of the ways I go with it is, yeah, to take that BTSU glove, and I find myself more and more actually running it that way, to a degree that maybe in the future, if you look at that build picture, if you're watching this video in the future, that might not be the build picture anymore and might be with this BTSU. There is also an Eclipse recommended folder, as with some of the other gear sets, and in there, this variation is there, together with that as well. In the recommended build list, if you scroll down far enough, there are some recommendations, for instance, for Legendary and such, and there it's also shown. Here, yeah, so I would take the BTSU, I would take a healing hive alongside of it, giving me the option to heal a little bit, because yeah, we don't have much in the form of repair skill, but enough to kind of keep my allies topped off, and then yeah, we can BTSU overcharge, and yeah, with a coordinated team, smart covers, pulses can go out, invincible shields can be pulled out. Those things are very powerful, but really the other side also needs to know that they can do those kind of things, because if everybody doesn't use their skills at all, then yeah, that's kind of a little bit more wasted. But if nothing else, it does reset their hives. So if multiple people have been down, you can reset their hives and give them another extra chance. And that can be very useful in Master and Legendary and such. We are taking the Scorpio just to apply a little bit more status effects. We are taking a Lefty just to apply sledges when we can. That's also why we are Survivalist. The Survivalist, of course, as well. We are applying status effects to enemies. All of my allies on my subgroup do get the bonus 10%. I don't. That bonus does not apply to me, but to my allies, 10% to status affected enemies. The plan is to status affect everyone, so yeah, that 10% is really strong. But also it gives me the flame grenades, which we can use to sledge much more easily, of course. Overall, this is one of the go-tos to have if you want to go into Legendary, but this needs to be ran by a person that is experienced with the Legendary. So this isn't per se a starter build for that, because it isn't actually the easiest role. For an experienced player, it is actually easier than playing a shooty role, but it needs to have an experienced player because you need to know what to do basically in every room. You need to know where they spawn to catch them at the door, because if they get out, that's kind of on you. You have one job, and that's to keep the enemy basically stuck as close to their spawn point and ready to be shot by your allies as much as possible. Overall, there are, for instance, out there several guides. For instance, Toasty, a friend of the channel's, does have foaming guides for all of the legendaries, going through the legendary and explaining where to go and what to foam and how to play it. And yeah, those can be highly recommended if you want to have this playstyle. These are quintessentially one of the most powerful builds to have around, also just for the fire version. And actually, the thing is, on this character, I have all the pieces as well as I have, for instance, with the glass one. I already showed that we can make it the normal variant as well. If I go back to just that improvised glove, I do have the backpack for it, actually that one, and I do have a Val mask in here, which is this one, and now it looks, of course, like a fire eclipse. And then yeah, I swap out the foam for a fire. This becomes a stinger hive most of the time for me, and now it is just a fire eclipse. It doesn't have that electric piece, but yeah, that extra skill haste is fine there as well, and if I really need to, I can go grab one from the stash. So overall, with that setup as well, you can very quickly swap it out to a fire eclipse, and of course for heroic and such, I much prefer a fire eclipse there as well. If we go back to the build picture real quick, yeah, it is a very overall a pretty easy build to get together. There are a lot of parts to it because yeah, you do want the Scorpio, you do want the Lefty, so you do need to go get those, but neither is hard to get. Scorpio is in the general loot pool. Lefty is just a general shotgun, so yeah, targeted shotguns for both. The Courier drops quite a lot, but you would need one that is with a skill tier, especially for taking Survivalist. You can take Technician and keep it a blue core, but you are giving up a little bit, even though you're there gaining Faraday, which is also actually a tactic that we do sometimes use. The Faraday with the hive, where it can protect your allies from being shocked or disrupted. But the rest of the pieces are pretty easy. This is a yellow course skills or skill tiered gear set. And because of that, we just get it always with the skill tier. We just put the stat alongside of it. A few mods into there. The improvised piece can be replaced with the Hanny U piece, which is likely easier to farm and yeah, pretty easy piece to get. The improvised one will likely cost you a lot of crafting and then also will likely cost you a lot in this optimization. But that tiny little 2%, yeah, if we're min-maxing, we're min-maxing, right? Overall, the Courier would be one of the harder pieces. One thing to consider as well, you can also go setup. There are some places where, yeah, Courier is not actually the preferred choice, especially some of the bosses and such. There we could take the setup, and I do actually have that on that character to go with the setup. Hermano can also be a choice for its bonuses. And overall, definitely a build worth considering, especially if you're going into some of the harder content, but you also need that experience. You generally want to have ran the legendaries a few times as a red, and then in the future, basically, once you've understood all of the spawns and kind of the mechanics of each of those masters and legendaries, then the Foam Eclipse can be your role. And with 4.06, we have a CoCo concentrated company TurDro build. And yeah, TurDro builds shortened of both the turret and the drone smashed together kind of implies also what they are for. They are halfway onto the turret and the drone, and they aren't as full into it as a turret and drone build. They are hybrids. And they are keeping a lot of weapon damage. That's kind of the intent with it. So we're kind of taking some skill tiers here. Those are going towards the turret and the drone. We're taking the capacitor, which especially here actually is the top weapon to pick just from the shooting end as well, but also feeds a little bit in skill damage. Making our turret and drone a 6 skill tier, so from a health perspective, they are actually pretty strong. From a damage dealing perspective, we aren't feeding that much skill damage into it, even though we are taking glass as well, just so it applies both to the skills and to our gun. And because all of that, they do some damage, a little bit of damage, enough to be very annoying to the enemy, and because of that, very good decoys. And then what we have is that the rest of it goes into crit chance and crit damage with a memento here as well. And that feeds into the capacitor to do a decent amount of damage there. The capacitor, of course, recoups for each skill tier that we have, recoups 7.5 weapon damage. The technician as well is there to give another skill tier. And of course, that skill tier feeds into that, but also lets us have a full red sacrifice here. TurDro hybrids like this, I do have a lot of them in my collection. We've already seen a negotiator one, we've already seen a striker one, and yeah, we also now have a CoCo. We've gone CoCo for Cocoa Puffs, and yeah, we've added 2 CoCo variants that are a TurDro hybrid and then the combat medic. On character tree, we already saw as well having the striker TurDro hybrid and the striker combat medic next to each other, or on the same character at the very least, but in my case they're next to each other in the loadout slots. That means that they can share some of the pieces, and here we have that as well. The mask, the holster, and the knee pad is shared actually between the combat medic and this TurDro hybrid, making that we're reusing some of the parts, and because of that we save a little bit on loadout slots. We are of course taking the memento. The memento in all of these TurDro hybrids is really strong. There's only the one place where I forgo it, which is the negotiator variant that we have, and there the negotiator backpack kind of brings a unique thing to that negotiator one. Because of that, there we're going with the negotiator backpack. Here though, on this and on the striker, we're going with memento. We are feeding of course into all of those tiers, but also the memento itself feeds into skill efficiency, feeds into weapon damage, and even gives us a little bit of regen, because we'll be losing still our armor quite a lot because we are running glass. That glass though is important. It is one of the few talents that will apply both to our skills and to our weapon. The other option we would have here is to, for instance, go Overwatch, but that's dropping quite a lot of damage. Especially here, I'm not expecting to be hit as much as, for instance, just the red build, because I do have 2 strong decoys. I don't have a revive hive to get myself back up again, but that usually still works out fine. CoCo, of course, the way that it's set up, doesn't work too well solo. In group settings, it works a lot better, as we've kind of discussed with the end-up look with it. But of course, if we're pairing it with a turret and a drone, then we're at least adding a few marks onto, or a few stacks onto each of the marks that we apply. Whenever we mark the enemy, depending on how many allied skills or allies themselves shoot that enemy while they're marked, How many stacks we get is dependent on all that. So here at least we are creating a few stacks to go into us. Now, the stacking on CoCo actually with the turret and drone is pretty slow. But once you get up there, you do stay up there, because that's also the thing with CoCo. You retain your stacks for quite a long time. If we take it into the game, it is actually saved exactly as that. I don't want to have any variations here. The Memento is going to be the go-to. Even though the CoCo backpack is good, the Memento feeding into all of those things is definitely much stronger. Most of the time as well, I'm not very concerned about going in and grabbing those pickups in the fight. What I do is just after each activity, mission, room, or something, once we've cleared that, I'll go and pick up all the mementos, and I'm mostly relying on that long buff, that 5-minute buff that we have, that just gives us some weapon damage and that skill efficiency. Both of those are, of course, very strong, and then yeah, that 3% regen once we have the full contingent of kill confirms in our backpack. At 30, yeah, that is also very strong, of course. That will help us heal up even in combat. Then yeah, the capacitor, of course, really strong in builds like this. It's feeding into the skill damage. It's one of the stronger weapons for this. One of the important parts is especially that, yeah, we get 10% crit chance and 30% crit damage on the capacitor. And this is equivalent on basically on a different gun to have equivalent numbers of crit chance and crit damage. If we were to have it here, that would mean 2 mods, of course, crit chance would be 10. And then we would need another 3 mods of crit damage to get that 30 crit damage that we have here. So this has the equivalent of 5 mods worth of crit chance and crit damage. And that's one of the things that actually does help it quite a lot, alongside of its talent, of course. And yeah, our skill damage kind of comes from here, and then we just toss out the turret and the drone to be decoys. They're the forward things, and we just kind of sit more behind them and do our thing and try to mark enemies and get these onto the target to add to those marks, add stacks to them. When they die, we get some stacks out of it. This one does work out pretty well, and I like it quite a lot. It does feel a tiny bit stronger than the Striker variant. We'll see actually with the build showcase. I'll go into the numbers then. We didn't really cover going hybrids or going yellow core or blue core with CoCo in the look. Mostly because it already was more than hour and a half, hour 40 minutes, however long it was. We'll save that for the build showcase, where we will include, actually, yeah, we'll go red, we'll go with the TurDro hybrid, and we'll go with the combat medic, and we'll even sneak in a tech tank. And yeah, these are actually worth considering. They aren't the strongest style of build, mostly because if I'm solo, I'm much more going to lean towards, for instance, a tech tank, and these do work well solo. In a group setting, I'm going to start to lean much more towards going just a full red version, but these can be just alternate ways of playing this, because when I'm playing this, I do actually want to shoot just as much as a red build, but then I want to babysit basically the turret and drone and make sure they're doing as much as they can as well. These can do a decent amount, but yeah, especially the turret and drone don't really have the oomph of the main weapon, and they shouldn't either, because of course this does provide a little bit of protection towards the team or yourself, just because they make for really good decoys. Setting this up in front will make it so that most enemies will actually have to target that as they try to get by it to get to you. And in that time, you should be able to kill them. These do have more than enough firepower to deal, especially with solo scaling, with anything out there. You wouldn't want to take it, for instance, yeah, into Legendary or Master, even though I'm pretty confident that I could take this through a Legendary pretty easily. Some of the Master rooms might be a little bit more hard. If we go back to the build picture, these are pieces that are record, and because of that, these come with red stats and a red core. We do have to record several pieces, which means that we generally need to optimize. This would make this build a little bit more expensive. The sacrifice isn't too hard to get. It is in the general loot pool under Providence, but it is a named item, and you would want to get it with crit chance, crit damage. We are keeping it red core here. That is what the Technician especially is also for, even though it has a lot of other benefits. It's also a skill tier, and because of that, we can just keep the sacrifice red. That way as well, I can reuse this sacrifice in other builds and such. The Memento isn't too hard to get. It is in targeted backpacks. It is also available through the Retaliation blueprint system, so we can get the blueprint from there, making it decently easy to get. The capacitor, the first one you will get from Summit. You have to only do 5 challenges. That is once per account. If you go to Summit, do 5 challenges, you'll get this. The challenges are pretty easy. They're in the map. You can pick things like getting a few headshots, doing 3 floors in 15 minutes or such. Some of them are definitely easier than others. So yeah, read through them. It'll be easy enough to figure out which ones you want to do. You could get this in like 10 minutes. If you're kind of know what you're doing, at most it'll be half an hour. And well worth getting. Capacitor makes a lot of builds like this possible. Overall, well worth considering, and especially the CoCo version is one of the better versions of this. I would always consider, the Negotiator and the Strikers pretty good, and this one definitely catches up to them and likely even surpasses them by a tiny bit. Not definitely a core build that you definitely have to have, but if you are interested in the playstyle of it, of a different kind of playstyle, very strong build to consider. As we come to 4.07, the sister build of the build we just saw on 4.06, which is the Combat Medic. And as we discussed there already, we are reusing several of the pieces. That's why I like having these side by side. We did it already as well on Character 3 on the Strikers over there. And this opens up a few slots, of course, because we're reusing the mask, the holster, and the knee pad from that TurDro hybrid we saw a second ago. We are, of course, swapping out the chest for an equalizer, but this is, of course, the equalizer I'm using on multiple builds. And then together with that, we have a BTSU data glove here, and then the backpack from CoCo instead. With that, BTSU data glove is definitely going in here, of course, if we are using that hive, especially for the healing, especially here where we don't have much in the form of skill haste. All of the hive's skill haste is coming from this BTSU data glove, and then we can use this to supercharge the team, of course, and giving ourselves overcharge, giving all of our teammates overcharge, and that can be very, very, very strong. Resetting all their hives, getting some skills up to be overcharged. Their shields are invincible, their pulses are damage increasers, and their smart covers are very OP. And that's actually the way to kind of run this as well. One of the things I like about Combat Medics nowadays as well is taking smart cover as the secondary. If I don't per se need that, if I'm with a team that's going to sit in my hive somewhat, I don't per se need this chem launcher, and I can take smart cover alongside of it, a 6th tier one, of course, as this build is 6th tier. We are taking those CoCo pieces, making them yellow core, taking Technician, that allows us to still have here the equalizer be just the red equalizer that we use in a lot of other builds in this on this character. And that way we do have the 6 skill tiers. Our healing isn't the greatest because we're not feeding too much into it. It's just the watch points and basically just the BTSU's repair skill roll. But more than enough to just heal a little bit, heal away chip damage. And actually with the chem, we can do decent damage. That's the reason why I do still consider the chem there especially. But yeah, situationally, I would go with the smart cover. You can also even go with the defensive smart cover, which can give bonus armor, and that can help as well. But either way, yeah, one of those 3 skills goes in there, but the hive definitely will stay and will be the main tool as well here. We are taking capacitor here as well, as with the TurDro hybrids. Here though, of course, we're kind of not making use of the skill damage side of things. We don't have anything doing skill damage, but the capacitor, because of its talent, is still the top pick and is very competitive with even killer weapons. Now with the killer weapons, they will be ahead when killer is active, but of course this isn't a build that is consistently going to get kills, especially if we're alongside of several full red builds, CoCo's, tipping skills, negotiators, strikers. All of those can outkill us. We'll get a kill here and there. That wouldn't be the problem, but we wouldn't be consistently getting them. Because of that, the capacitor's consistency makes it definitely the choice because it is ahead of measured weapons in this same slot. So we're basically taking the capacitor, we're wasting its skill damage side, but it is still the best choice. I usually pair this as well here with a Future Perfect weapon. With that Future Perfect, we can get 1 kill in and overcharge ourselves. That can be sometimes just useful to do. It isn't too hard to just get a last hit in, and generally I have it with a rifle, and the rifles can hit pretty hard, of course, per shot, and I can kind of time it. If I see kind of the health bar go down, I start kind of shooting towards the end of it, and hopefully I can yoink the kill and get a Future Perfect going. That is just there to, kind of overcharge us here and there, because that can help our healing and especially our hive's cooldown quite a bit, especially if I've used my hive already and we're already on the cooldown for the BTSU, which is 2 minutes. We can try to sneak that in. Overall, yeah, these are well worth builds having, especially if you like their playstyle. The playstyle is to be basically shooting just as much as the red builds, and here and there doing a little bit of healing alongside of it. Because of that, I enjoy them really very much for the playstyle. If we take it into the game, it is saved exactly as shown there. And yeah, we do make sometimes the choice, especially on the skills slot, to go with different skills alongside of it. The smart covers, both of them are actually very powerful. But of course, that 41% that we have here just as a 6th tier on the damaging, on the precision smart cover, 41 DT DTOC, that is a lot, plus 90% weapon handling. And if we overcharge it, we even get more. This is one of the most, I feel, overlooked and most OP skills in the game, especially if it is on a build like this. This can actually make it so that the build like this in a group setting can carry its own that group versus, for instance, just having 4 reds can carry their own. Because, of course, we are giving up a lot of damage. This is not going to deal as much damage as a full red. Of course it isn't. But it has more than enough damage to get its own kills, to make itself a tool that can still kill. Because when you go, for instance, with a full healer, especially on heroic, it is actually detrimental because you're losing one person's output on damage. You're, of course, buffing the others and giving them heals and stuff. But just losing that extra person shooting at enemies, getting aggro's away from other players, that already costs a little bit. This can, of course, still do enough damage to get some kills in here and there, be pretty productive in that end. And then alongside of it, we're doing some healing and such. And because of that playstyle, I really do enjoy it. It's shooting just as much as a red build and then also doing healing. It can actually be a little bit exhausting to play this for long periods of time. Yeah, we are reusing that equalizer we have on several other builds, and that's then also the reason we are taking the yellow cores on especially the gear set pieces, which would also be the easier pieces to the yellow core anyway. Technician covers for that last tier that we're missing here. We can also, because we are Technician with that Hive, we can Faraday our allies, so we can make it so that, especially in rooms where there are disrupt mechanics going on, we can actually, yeah, if we deploy our Hive because of the Faraday perk, as long as we have it unlocked, of course, in the specialization, yeah, we are, once the Hive is deployed, it will provide its Faraday to nearby agents, any nearby agents, and that can be used actually to prevent disrupt. For instance, actually in Countdown, if you time it well and put this when the hunters spawn in, or, you know, for instance, by extraction, when the hunters get triggered, you can actually prevent that initial disrupt to yourself, definitely, and even to some teammates by placing it well. If they are in range of it, it will prevent shock and disrupt, especially the disrupt in those cases. But even the shock, for instance, in other times can be a really big boon, especially, for instance, if we consider that the keener fight at the start of it, it shocks you. So yeah, there's a lot of uses for that mechanic as well. Overall, these are very enjoyable builds, and this CoCo one is actually one of the better ones, I feel. I've always enjoyed the Striker one. That was one of my go-tos. Recently, we've added in an Umbra one as well, and that's also very potent. But this CoCo one, especially because of the stacking mechanic of this, as we already have seen in group settings, CoCo works really well. And what we're getting here is that stacking mechanic with a combat medic. And it is actually easier to get this stacked up and keep it stacks than getting that Striker to 100 stacks, because we are doing it mostly with Chestic Batzer, which is a somewhat lower RPM weapon. It will get there on the Strikers to 100 stacks, but sometimes as well, I want to be focusing on healing my allies if they're taking multiple hits or not playing very smart. We might need a little bit more attention there. But here, of course, with the stacking mechanic on CoCo, where we're just marking enemies, and as long as our allies are hitting them as well, we're getting multiple marks off of each kill. And that means that I can kind of spray at the enemies and then maybe just focus on getting a chem out if I need to heal someone, and that will work out still fine. This build as well is one that is a little bit costly to get together, because yeah, we do need to find red core pieces. These are all red core pieces that we need to recore, so we need to find them with the stats underneath there. That will usually cost you a little bit in the optimization. It isn't too much because it is gear set pieces, so we're just optimizing one stat up just to get that skill tier there. And this is a red core skill gear set, so that means that the attributes, these minor attributes, will mostly come in red form. When it is a yellow core set, basically, it will mostly come with yellow. So if you need the red stats, that will be much rarer. So for instance, with the red FI, that is that can take a while to get together. But the red CoCo or a yellow CoCo, yellow core CoCo is not actually that hard to get. Okay, equalizer in there, BTSU again from the general loot pool, capacitor from the summit pretty quickly. Weapons-wise, alongside of it, we stick whatever with some Future Perfect. Quick step, of course, to keep up with our allies. One thing we can take as well, and we'll see actually on the Striker on character 5, the Striker Combat Medic on character 5, where I have it set up with Ferocious Calm. Here as well, we could take Ferocious Calm. We can just stick that in. Instead of the Obliterate, we have then Overwatch, a group buff that I need to watch out and be in cover for. But most of the time, if I do equip it and try to get that mechanic going, I, of course, can be in cover pretty consistently. Being in cover and then just providing an extra group buff going around. A very strong build for the kind of player that enjoys this kind of playstyle. If you like playing the support role a little bit, but you still want to keep your own damage, which is definitely one of my go-tos why I like this. I like that very much. I like being a support a little bit, healing the team a little bit, but I want to be able to do my own damage. And because of that, this is one of my go-tos, and this CoCo version has definitely become one of my favorites very quickly. And on 4.08, we see a high-end headhunter for pistols especially. And this is already one that we've kind of covered recently in the pistol headhunters. And in there, we focused on 2 pistols. That's also why it's not specifically stating a name for the pistol. We had Reguluses in there and we had Harvests, because you can go with both. Each has their own benefits. Harvest especially can go determined. Regulus can especially blow up entire waves. And yeah, both have their place and time. And then on the gear end, you can go Hunter's Fury or you can go high end. And this is the high end. What especially the Hunter's Furies have is actually, because of the way that the proximity buff goes into Headhunter from Hunter's Fury, they have a much better second shot, a much better cap. The high-end ones, especially nowadays with Imminence armaments in here, 3 pieces to get that 60% pistol, they do keep up still on the shots. But especially what they have is that they can much more easily stick in a Dodge City holster or other exotics as well. So the Dodge City holster is a really good tool, especially to get it going. And with the Regulus, of course, we can make that explosion also carry the Dodge City shot, making it so that you can clear a wave pretty easily. You don't per se need a headhunter build for that. Even if just having a Dodge City gunslinger holster on even a just high-end red or something can be a choice, just to have that Regulus shot once in a while. Here though, we're very much setting it up to be a headhunter. We're of course taking Chain Killer as well, Punch Drunk as another pistol brand, and all of those together make for a really formidable build. On this one, less than even on the Headhunter's Furies that we've seen. I don't per se, the shotgun would work better on the Headhunter's Furies, and especially as well, either a marksman rifle or an 1886 also generally tends to work better on those. This one, because of having both DNH and Imminence armaments, its shots are really going towards that Regulus that we have here. If we take it into the game, actually, we see that it is saved a tiny bit differently. As the save itself, as we have it there, if I pull it up here, we see that we have 4 pieces of Imminence armaments. And that is because I want to give myself, again, options. Now, we are showing it there with the Dodge City. I have that, of course, at the ready here. But there's another option to go with, which is a very strong one, which is a headshot memento, a headshot modded memento. And I have that at the ready. I even have a crit chance one and a headshot one, because I don't even want to play around with, for instance, getting that mod into there. I just have it at the ready with the headshot. And of course, with Memento, this can be a really strong build as well. Especially taking Memento, taking Technician instead of Sharpshooter, because we can go with several specializations here. Especially Sharpshooter, of course, can be good for the stability that it can provide and the little bit of extra ammo, for instance, for the marksman rifles and such, even though that isn't that useful here. But also the flashbang grenades are pretty good. We can take Technician for an extra tier on the shield, especially with the Memento. That makes a lot of sense. Then we have a 3-tier shield, and the shield can actually, for instance, here already at 2 tiers, even with the Memento not charged. It's already at 8 million. That can take a few hits, and while it is taking a few hits, we can then, be headshotting some enemies. We can also take Firewall, and Firewall is especially there to take the Striker Shield. That one also can be a really strong tool because it has a damage component to it that will increase our damage by quite a lot. But in here as well, I'm giving myself several options, even as well nowadays, even though I consider it not intended. If we go back to that Imminence Armaments backpack that we had here, I consider it not intended, but Overdogs, like the Shroud, seems to go as well into the Headhunter calculation, making it so that as long as you're paying attention to what you're shooting, because you do need to adhere to the tiering of this, but there is of course a lot of enemy types that is in that tier 3, as we've discussed quite often with Overdogs already. Grenadiers, snipers, and assaults and rushers, 4 very common enemy types, they're all in there. And because of that, taking this is actually one of the strongest setups nowadays. But that's also why I save it the way that I am, giving a lot of options, giving me all of the options effectively, and I can always go and change out my specialization just by going to the White House or to any of the other settlements. Overall, the high end, does have a few options like this, making it easier to get some of those exotics in, and that is especially its strength. Also, it doesn't need to get into that 15-meter range, which can be a boon, because that 15-meter range, even though, it is pretty close, that 15 to 20-meter range, I find myself quite often in. There, the Headhunter Furies, the Hunter's Fury part of it, we need to be within 15 meters for that mark to be on the enemy, where we get that extra amplified damage from. Without that, with this, we can actually reach out to 20, even though that, for instance, the Regulus optimal range starts to drop off at 16. That's still fine. We still have a little bit more range, and I do like that about the high end. That's why, as we discussed with the pistol Headhunter video as well, there is virtues to both of them. The Headhunter's Fury is definitely easier to put together, because here as well, we are going with red pieces, but with the Headhunter's Fury, we're just also getting Hunter's Fury pieces, which are easier to get. It's just 2 stats instead of 3, and we are using less names. So for instance, here we do have the Punch Drunk, not a hard name to get, but one that might take you a little bit longer. And then, the Dodge City is available through its project. Everybody will have access to that to get that first one. That can be done in an hour or so. It is mostly just waiting for that 12 o'clock to come around after getting all of those exotic parts from the control points. But it is definitely gettable. It is also, once you have the blueprint once, it is actually in the loot pool, and it can also be shared to you as well. Other weapons we basically would need. The Harvest is only a time-limited item, so it is available from the Hoarder generally when he is in a special holiday state. It is also, for instance, in the Krampus caches that are going on while I'm recording this video. But for instance, trying to get it from the Krampus caches, you need it to be with Detox or with Determined or whatever talent you want it to be, but preferably you wouldn't want one that already has Detox, so you optimize that up and the weapon damage, and then you can free talent it. That can be a little bit harder from these caches than it would be for farming our Hoarder friend when he's in a special state, which he isn't currently. He might be, again, during Valentine's, I would guess. Regulus is available from those recent caches as well. And also, if you're looking for a Regulus build, either making the high end that we have here or the Headhunter Fury, one of the variants of it, that's the builds for it, especially. It is a very strong gun, but Regulus, unlike, for instance, the Eagle Bear and the Ouroboros, those don't need dedicated builds. The Regulus does prefer to be on a dedicated build. But also, you could just stick it in the Striker with just the Dodge City, and once in a while just pull it out and just delete a wave. That is also an option. Overall, definitely worth considering as a build, especially if you do like the playstyle of headhunting, and then especially the pistol headhunters are kind of aggressive and try to get close to the enemy and pop some heads. but they aren't, for instance, much capable of some of the higher content. Especially they struggle against some of the names and such quite consistently, where there I would take Hotshot, for instance, with a marksman rifle if I'm going after control points. This is much more for activities and such, but can work well enough. And especially for things like bounty cheesing, sometimes I also pull it out, as of course they're all spawning from a door, and that explosion can make a lot of beautiful things happen. Yeah, overall, maybe watch, if you are very interested in it, maybe watch the pistol Headhunter showcase that we did recently. That goes a little bit more in depth into it, because there are two big variants and both of them have their merits, and I wouldn't per se put one higher recommended than the other one, except that the Hunter's Fury is a little bit easier to get together. So maybe start there, and then maybe in the future, if you go like, I wouldn't mind trying this one too, then you make it as well. And coming to 4.09, we have a Heartbreaker in its red form, which we affectionately call RedBreaker. And the Heartbreaker is a decent set from the damage standpoint. It actually can, on paper, look competitive against Obliterate Striker. In the past, the Vigilance variant that we had here, for instance, with the similar exotic, so if both were running Overdogs, for instance, if we were putting an Heartbreaker, Red Heartbreaker up against an Obliterate Striker, they would be basically head-to-head, with actually the advantage going tiny bit to the Heartbreaker. And nowadays, though, Equalizer has come in, and Equalizer with Perfect Obliterate has given the advantage back to Striker, but they are really head-to-head on max stacks, both being 100 stack builds, on max stacks when compared like that. Why don't we run Heartbreaker then as much as Striker? It comes down to its stacking mechanic. It is definitely being held back because not every pellet or shot that we shoot at an enemy gets counted by the system that it has. We can use things like Linked Laser Pointer, of course, to pulse for us, as the way that Heartbreakers work is you need a pulsed enemy. Shooting them should give you a stack per shot hitting them or per pellet, and the same way as with Striker. That doesn't work out that way. When doing them side by side, and especially, for instance, if we try to, because of course, Strikers has a rate of fire. If we put basically the same amount, basically with rate of fire on that, and we pick a higher weapon, so that actually Heartbreaker even has higher RPM, and you just side by side them, yeah, no, Heartbreaker does not stack as well as Striker can. It doesn't count every stack, and some attribute that to the Linked Laser Pointer. That doesn't seem to be the case, at least not in my testing, because yeah, we can also headshot pulse enemies, or we can just pulse them outright with a skill or such. That doesn't seem to alleviate the issue. It is mostly that, yeah, just even on the pulse enemies, it's not counting every hit that as a stack the way that Striker does, but Heartbreaker doesn't, and that's the biggest issue here. That makes it so that, for instance, with a Red Heartbreaker like this, we do need to still stack with an ACS. The stacking is significantly worse. If we try to, with an Obliterate Striker, for instance, we just need to go to 100 stacks. We can do that with the main weapon. In a fight, 2 mags in, 3 mags in, will likely be high up in the stacks. 4 mags in will likely be capped out. Here, that isn't the case. So we kind of need to rely on the ACS a little bit more. And that is really a detriment, because in longer range fights and such, that isn't really an option. And generally, we don't want to either. We want to just be using our weapon, keeping a little bit of distance and keeping a little bit of safety through distance. So that's the downsides for Heartbreaker. And that's why we don't see it as often, even though actually it has a benefit over Striker as well, where it has a little bit of bonus armor going on. That bonus armor as well can protect Vigilance, and so can a shield. Whenever a shield or Vigilance or blue armor gets hit, you don't lose Vigilance, and that is actually an important point. So we can protect that Vigilance a little bit better than other builds, because of course with the Obliterate, the Striker can't lose that if it gets hit. It just keeps its Obliterate up. Here we do lose our Vigilance, but that Vigilance is also active from the first shot. So when we are just starting the engagement, we're already at that 25% total weapon damage. In the case of Striker, though, we can go glass, but that then brings its own downsides. It's a whole system going on here. With Heartbreaker, we definitely want to take the chest, especially if we're setting it up in a damage way here. Really, the only talents that can compete with the chest on Heartbreaker is to take Intimidate. But then, of course, we're feeding into Intimidate. Also, Intimidate is very close range. It can be a choice, but honestly, I would just take the chest in most cases. Overall, I basically never take the backpack. The backpack gives you more bonus armor per hit. In most cases, either taking something like Adrenaline Rush or Bloodsucker, or generally what I take, a Memento, all seems much better choices than that extra little bit of blue armor that it provides. Here we're taking the Force with Vigilance, and one thing that did change for this season is this used to be, of course, be a Cheska backpack. This has become a unit alloys. In this case, we are gaining a little bit of burst over Cheska, we're losing a little bit of sustain, and it is a tiny bit in the burst sense because the crit and crit chance, crit damage is pretty low on this build to begin with, meaning that Cheska, the higher our crit chance and crit damage combined kind of is, Cheska loses and loses a little bit more on unit alloys, which is feeding, of course, into rate of fire. Which on Heartbreaker, yeah, we don't have that rate of fire bonus that Striker has, so this is effectively a full 5%. And then, yeah, Cheska is quite a bit less than, well, a little bit less than that 5% here. But the reason we do go with that unit alloys is to help out the stacking a little bit. 5% more on the stacking helps out a little, and it doesn't lose as much on the sustain end in comparison to, for instance, when it is put onto Striker, where it loses quite a bit because there's already as well a little bit of lossiness because it's feeding into that same rate of fire pool. Here, it isn't feeding into that, and because of that, the burst does hold at a little bit higher, and the sustain, because of that, is also a little bit higher in comparison. So here, when we're getting also 5% faster stacking, it makes a little bit of sense, and that is the choice I've made here, is to go to a unit alloys. Then as well, that opens up, for instance, to go 2-piece unit alloys with the glove alongside of it. But of course, again, here we're kind of set up to be with any of the exotics as that we commonly see. Overdogs again, Coyote, Tinkerer, we could go Centurion, we could go Exodus, we could go Nimble, we could go several choices, even Memento, of course, as we'll see the Heartbreaker TechTank in a little bit, which is on this character too. If we go into the game, it is, of course, yeah, saved as a 5-piece, as a lot of these builds end up being on this slot. We see it is saved exactly that way. This is, of course, done again to give me the options as we talk. Yeah, we can go with a lot of different things. And of course, even on this character, I can go 2-piece unit alloys because they have that crit chance, crit damage, that they red core that we have here for unit alloys from the high-end build that they have. So I could even go 2-piece of this, but of course, I can, yeah, keep that Heartbreaker piece here and go Tinkerer, for instance, and then go, for instance, Killer Flatline, which is a really good combo for here, because with Heartbreaker, we do want to run Technician, especially for that Link Laser Pointer. We already are going to invest into that Link Laser Pointer. Then Flatline is a really good pick. On the weapon itself as well, we could go Flatline, and that is definitely an option to consider. And yeah, overall, Red Heartbreaker is worth trying out if you kind of want to, but it doesn't have a different play style than Striker. Because of that, I don't find myself using it much. Every time I'm on it, I'm like, why am I not on the Striker that this character, of course, also has? If we had just a Heartbreaker here and that was our only option, we would. And unlike things like Tipping Skills, CoCo, or Umbra, Heartbreaker basically plays the same. The only places I do end up grabbing this is if there's some value to having Technician, then I'll load this up. And this will then be kind of like Strikers, but then with Technician. And then, for instance, we can have the Faraday being there, as we can drop our shield down to, for instance, give the entire team Faraday effect of not being disrupted or shocked if they're close enough to that hive. It doesn't need to be, for instance, a healing hive or anything. A revive hive works fine, as long as I still have access to it, of course. So there are things like that about it, but there's also nothing stopping me on putting Strikers there and then just going and grabbing Technician from the White House. And also, alongside of all that, Heartbreaker is a blue core gear set, and that means that most of the time it will actually drop with blue core or blue attributes alongside of the blue cores. And that means that we also need to recore all of these pieces, making it quite expensive in comparison to the red pieces of a Striker or even an Umbra or Tipping Skills or CoCo. All of those also overall at least give something else, and then Striker is Striker, and then a Chest Striker, of course, as well, will be quite a bit ahead. So with all of those considered, it's not worth putting Heartbreaker together in this form, I would say. I do still keep it just to play around with it. It is at the tiniest bit different from Strikers, but I don't find myself using it much, and I can't really recommend it outright. It's also no longer in the recommended build list in this way, but I do feel Heartbreaker has a place when we take it and make it a tech tank, which you'll see later on. One that I would skip unless you really want to have basically one of each build. And coming to 410, we see the TripleTick build. This has been a common style of putting OD together for the longest of whiles, even before OD really got a buff with Project Resolve, where it got its marking mechanic and was made group-wide as well. Before that, OD was actually you had to kill the enemy while they had a status effect going on them. And because of that, the layout was actually mostly the way it was ran was like this. You would still get hollow point ammo, but it wouldn't be group wide to begin with, and then also it wouldn't be as potent as we have now with the chest of ongoing directive being available. So we would actually set up OD with status effect, and that is actually where this build kind of originated a long time ago. And the idea of it is it has 3 ticks. We have ourselves the bleed. We have ourselves the vial ticks happening off of the bleed, of course. And then here we have the pestilence. Now, one of the ways we could run it as well, before the pestilence actually got buffed to be decent, which was also a long time ago. And yeah, for the longest of times, pestilence wasn't really worth using. The tick was okay, but the weapon itself was very weak. Iron Lung wasn't, though. Iron Lung was very potent, and we were running it actually with the Iron Lung, at least I was, for the longest of times back then. Nowadays, though, we have the marking mechanic, and because of that, just full red OD works out, because in the past, you would need the enemy to have a long enough status effect, for instance, that bleed, because the pestilence itself, of course, is not a status effect. It is a debuff upon the enemy, so that wouldn't count. But you needed a long enough bleed that you could kill them in that time, because if you didn't, the mark didn't exist. You had to kill them while they had a status effect on them, and it needed to be you getting the kill. So you needed potency a little bit on the weapon damage end, so we would take red scores, and then alongside that, some status effects to make it so that our bleed would last long enough so we could kill them that way. That is nowadays, of course, no longer required. The mark stays for 10 seconds, regardless of how short or long the status effect alongside of it is, meaning that we just have to hit the enemy with a bleed. How short of a duration it is doesn't matter, because the second shot is going to basically hit them right after, especially with weapons that are in the 850 RPM range or 750 RPM range. So because of that, we don't per se need this style of build anymore. So why do I still have it? It's because it's also still good, actually. So here we are actually going for 3 damage over time effects, 3 dots on the enemy. And because of that, we can basically shoot a red with this, and even with a few shots of the Pesty, getting a few tiny stacks on them, there at that point, you can consider them dead. There's enough damage in the bleed and the vial tick, and then whatever tiny bit of Pesty tick we have on that enemy to kill them. Especially a solo red, they will just die to that. So we can actually just spray down a wave, and then just focus on things like the purples, things like the elite heavies, mini tanks, warhounds, and stuff like that. And yeah, that is actually a pretty good trade, because also, as with all ODs, this can deal with 5 directives really well. This has been actually one of my go-to solo 5 directive builds, as yeah, OD, of course, can deal with, especially that ammo directive. That's the main one we need to deal with. The rest we just deal with just by, you know, not getting hit as much for the armor ones and the fragile armor and, you know, hard to earn and things like that, and no regen. For things like the skill ones, yeah, we'll just either not use one of the skills, or we'll just go and grab those pickups with scavenge skills. But the ammo one, if we don't have ammo, we can't do much. Here, OD generates us that ammo. It does it group wide as well, and this can then be a good way of using this, especially solo, with the scalings of that to, yeah, you just spray down in missions and stuff the waves as they spawn, and then just focus a little bit on the elites, and most of the things just drop dead. It isn't per se too fast, because if it was, it would be one of the top metas, of course. It isn't, but it is still a decent build. Specialization-wise, we want to either take Survivalist in a group setting where we can provide our the 10% damage to status affected enemies to our allies. But also, for instance, for seasons like this, where we have Pistolero, I do need Gunner there to kind of get our starting ammo. We could, of course, try to get a pistol kill, but that would feel very weak. So instead, we would take Gunner to get our starting ammo going, and then from there we go. And then, yeah, Demo can also be a choice for that detox for the team. And the bleed grenade that it has, because we need to start it in somehow. We generally would take a revive hive, and some of the skills would be maybe towards that. Now, of course, in seasons with cool skills, we wouldn't want to use that skill. We would want to just keep our revive hive because we are a glass build. Of note here as well, we are still keeping glass here, even though the OD chest has become really powerful. That really powerful part of it is mostly just for the weapon part, of course. It amplifies the damage, or increases the amplification of the damage of the hollow point rounds from 20% to 50% just for ourselves. But glass applies to everything, and glass is actually 30%, and it is a point, because normally we would just have a 20% from the hollow point rounds. We don't add together the glass. The glass multiplies against it. So it is actually quite a bit ahead, going OD plus glass. The reason we don't do it in the full red is because it is an easier bonus just to take that hollow point round and not have to deal with glass. But here it is applying to the Valtics, it is applying to the bleeds, and it is applying to that pesty tick as well. So here glass still makes sense. If we take it out into the game, it is actually saved like that. There is really only one variant here. We want to keep that Valmass. We can go Catalyst. I've tried out Catalyst here, but just giving up a tick and making it a double tick. Yeah, the triple tick is, of course, 50% more. And because of that, I do like, actually, if we're kind of leaning so much into the ticks, I kind of lean towards that. The Catalyst also doesn't add that much damage, and actually, if I was going to run the Catalyst, I would maybe lean more towards just running Overdogs here as well. We are taking, of course, that Pestilence is one of those ticks. It is not, again, a status effect, but it is feeding off of the weapon damages that we have. But it's just one of the better tools that we have available, just because the base weapon is also pretty strong. We aren't feeding too much into crit chance, crit damage, but I have a few rolls here going into crit chance and crit damage, and we aren't landing per se that high, as we have 2857, which is a little bit more damage, but actually you could choose to, and a lot of people do, choose to go with something else with this, with these mod slots and such. You can go just skill haste and maybe get your skills out a little bit more quickly, especially if you're using some of the stickies and such, or smart cover. But what you also can do is take, for instance, a few repair skills and a few incoming repairs. Usually you would take one incoming repair more than repair skills, because you also get some repair skills from your watch. And that can make for a decent enough healing chem just by itself. Now, overall, these are well worth running, and I find myself using them quite often, especially solo, because they can deal with 5 directives and they have a very unique playstyle. Nothing plays like this triple tick build. You're playing it quite differently. You're just trying to spray down the waves as they spawn, and then focusing basically the things that are going to survive to burn them down. And because of that, it has a place in my heart. I've definitely always enjoyed this, especially since the Pestilence kind of got back, or was buffed quite a bit. This has been, one of my go-tos for solo 5 directives, even though you do need to learn to play a red build, of course. It is glass. You need to learn positioning. You need to learn how to survive. You need to learn how to use your tools. But when you do, this can make for a decent way of dealing with 5 directives. And on 411, we have a Red Eclipse. As I discussed a little bit earlier, I have eclipses on all of my characters, even that one has a foam eclipse on character 2, but we have a fire eclipse there in the form of a fire refactor. But I enjoy Eclipse a lot. It is a very versatile set, especially on the yellow side of things. But here we're taking it in a different direction. We are taking it and making it red. Originally, this build actually worked really well for the old Hollywood. That was actually what this build was made for. And there, back in the day before Project Resolve, in the olden days when when we were still young men, You had to actually do shock damage or explosive damage to the enemies, and that would make the shields explode. Nowadays, of course, we can even do it with the jamming, and that's actually the way to go about it with Hollywood nowadays. But back in the day, I used to run this with an Elmo and the shocker punch, and I would run up to enemies and just punch them in their stupid faces. And of course, when you're wearing the Elmo and you have the shocker punch and you have a shield equipped, you don't have to actually use it. You can just melee without the shield. That would apply a shock to the enemy. That would blow that enemy up. Basically, that enemy would blow up hopefully all the other enemies. And that would make it so that with Hollywood, that was actually a decent choice. Now, we could, of course, also just do that with the Elmo itself on a red build by just charging it up on the shields, and then eventually it'll go into its shock rounds and do its thing. But that wasn't as silly as this. So if we can go silly, we do go silly. Now, this, as you can see, isn't laid out like that anymore because Hollywood, nowadays we don't need that. For Hollywood, we have much better choices. We just take a striker, we put the Legatus chest on it, or just the sacrifice, and a jammer pulse and a grenade launcher is all you really need. So I wanted to find a new purpose for this Red Eclipse, and definitely Catalyst helped out here, actually, as one of the places where it fits in pretty well. Both because it feeds into the status effect side and the weapon damage side, and because of that, it works actually really nicely with this build. This is the one place that I've tended to use Catalyst and is the mainstay of this build. And what we're effectively doing here, the backpack is pretty good for a damage amp. We're taking, together with that, the equalizer, we're taking all crit chances and crit damages. We don't, of course, have a really powerful amplifier or effect from the gear set, because it is, of course, set up to spread status effects. So that it will still do. The backpack, though, is actually really strong. That 30% damage to status affected enemies is really strong. And then we're taking the Iron Lung, and we're just relying on the fire of the Iron Lung. That does mean, though, that we aren't actually doing too much damage until that fire comes in. But once that fire comes in, we are actually triggering that backpack to be active on our weapon as well, because it applies to everything. That backpack is kind of like glass, where it does apply to basically all sources where we deal damage, as long as they are status affected in the case of the backpack. So it is kind of like an extra glass, and we could actually pair it alongside of glass as well, having double glass effectively. But equalizer nowadays, of course, pretty easy, and here is as its full strength because we have no other total weapon damage. And of course as well then, when we set something on fire, when they die, to us or to anybody else from any source, they will spread that fire still. Here we're not using the chest of Eclipse, and our duration on the fire isn't that long because the flames of the Iron Lung are actually decently long, but they are also affected by status effect. You could use that to make them a little longer, but we aren't doing that here. We are feeding everything into some of our damage, into crit chance and crit damage. If we take it into the game, this one is actually also saved as a 5-piece, as we see here. And that's, again, as well, 4 options. I feel the way we have it there, where we aren't taking the chest, even though the chest can be really useful because it increases the spread range and the percentages spread. That can make it so that the fire actually is a little bit more potent, and that can make a difference. But also Obliterate is pretty good. Now, of course, if we don't take that, Obliterate, we do still keep the backpack. The backpack is really good for what we're trying to do here. So if we're taking the chest, we basically move it to either be a unit alloys piece effectively on somewhere else. That is my go-to. We could also make a Cheska, but then actually if we go Cheska, I do need to change some of the crit chances and crit damages on the build to kind of make place for Cheska. So nowadays it's set up to either take the equalizer or it takes an piece of unit alloys from the high-end build that this character has. But yeah, setting it up with that equalizer, I feel is kind of the way to go. We do get a decent amount of extra damage out of our weapon this way. And then also I always carry around a weapon or a skill to trigger before we kind of use our main tool, the Iron Lung as we have it here. This way I can actually get a status effect at the start of a fight, and then we can try to spread that, of course, and then the Iron Lung comes in more later in the fight, and then we get some fires from there. Overall, a fun, enjoyable build, one that is a little bit more out there. This doesn't do damage well, and also the thing is, of course, I would be to the team. I would be much more useful as a full Eclipse, as a full fire Eclipse. I will likely be able to send more fires out, likely be able to actually, at the end screen, basically have done more damage. But then I'm not running around with the iron lung, setting everything on fire and just laughing maniacally while we're still spreading it, while we're shooting them actually for quite a decent amount of damage. Because here, of course, if we're just taking all of those red cores and such, and here as well, the catalyst, one of the reasons that it works out well here, it is going into a little bit of damage, but it also has a red core as well. And that does make a difference, for instance, in comparison to taking a vial here, which is the thing that I used to take in the past with it, in the same way as a TripleTick. We could also take the vial actually for an extra little bit of tick, but here those flames are kind of coming in a little bit later. So overdogs would honestly be the other option that I would take here, but this has become the place where I'm using a catalyst, so I'm going to stick to that. Damage-wise, it can hit decently hard, not of course as hard as really hot-blooded red builds, but as something different, doing a special thing, I have enjoyed this a lot. And I do find myself pulling it out quite often just to have a little bit of a different playstyle where I'm trying to set enemies on fire and making it spread, but not while doing it with a fire Eclipse the normal way, but then with a different tool instead. This is a harder set to get together. All of these will, of course, be yellow quartz pieces, so they mostly come with yellow stats. That means finding actually the pieces for this can take some while, and then even then it will be pretty expensive. The catalyst, of course, comes from the Army Terminal mission, and that can be a decently long farm, depending on how lucky you get. Also, one singular, it isn't the world bosses in Brooklyn that drop it. It is one singular one that can drop it, which is the world boss named Charlie. Now, that one is, yeah, maybe in between, you can go and farm him up a little bit. But, yeah, he's trying to find a singular one out of 16 is kind of annoying. Army Terminal is definitely the way to go for Catalyst, and that's also the only place we can get it, meaning that it is technically locked behind the Brooklyn DLC as well, so you do need to own the Brooklyn DLC. Iron Lung is in the general loot pool nowadays. In the past as well, Iron Lung used to be one of those items where you needed to have the blueprint, and the blueprint wasn't being handed out anymore, so it was kind of hard to get. That has all been resolved nowadays. So it is just in the general LMG pool, so you can get it from there. We're pairing it here as well with the lefty, just for sledge when we can make that happen with the grenades. And yeah, firewall is being used here actually as the fire of this, of course, is also a great tool to start some fights off with. Overall, not the highest recommendation, but especially if you kind of like to play, if you are a pyromaniac, kind of like me, this is a different way to be one, and not as effective, definitely, as a fire Eclipse can be in most missions and stuff, but just to play a different variant of it in this red form is quite enjoyable. And with 412, we get a shotgun-based Hunter's Fury. On Character 2, we already saw a SMG-based one. Here we're getting one that is more set up for the shotguns, especially the crit will be a little bit different. And also here we're going with different talents, because for the SMGs, we can go either Intimidate or Obliterate. And generally, and there as well, we had Vigilance on the backpack. For the shotguns, really only Intimidate works out here. And there are definitely several ways we can then make blue armor happen for them. I like Adrenaline Rush, mostly because Adrenaline Rush will also apply to us when we're basically starting our chain, because Bloodsucker as the other option, that does need a kill. That can be pretty consistent, but that means that you don't have Intimidate up for the first one, and same is true for Memento, as we have here in the corner the other options. Here, because we're also going Intimidate still with this, I'm actually going with Cheska and Grupo as our picks here, as they tend to give us the most. Of course, yeah, unit alloys would not per se actually be an option here, because these are weapons that we're not firing. They aren't automatic, at least with the exception of the ACS. None of the shotguns is automatic. We're not per se firing them at their RPM. And then Cheska and Grupo make a lot more sense. So for Intimidate chests, Cheska still makes sense. That's the places where some Cheska chests have remained. Then yeah, we're pairing that with 4 pieces of Hunter's Fury, kind of lining up our crit chances and crit damages to land in a decent spot here on 58. And here I'm showing it with the Scorpio as the main weapon. Scorpio can be really strong. Scorpio can stun lock one enemy down and just basically you can decimate them pretty easily. And it works well enough. But there's definitely something to be said as well for taking, for instance, the Tsunami with its perfect pummel, or just taking a weapon with either Killer, or for instance, the Light Glue with Brazen, or just a normal weapon with Brazen. And all of those are really strong. They are great talents. Pummel can, of course, reset our magazine basically every 3 kills. Here with Tsunami, even every 2 kills. Killer is one of the ways that we can actually have a talent that works well with these shotguns, because a lot of talents that we would normally pick are, of course, not available here. And Brazen is really strong, but yeah, it doesn't need enough pellets to hit. That means that the Light Glue that only needs 4 pellets to hit definitely has my preference. And the Super 90 and the SASG are both really good weapons. On the exotic end, it's mostly just the Scorpio. The other weapons in the Sweet Dreams and, of course, the Overlord are not per se worth considering. Their talents are not there. Scorpio, though, does have a lot less damage nowadays. It did get a definite nerf, we could call it, back in the day with Project Resolve. A deserved one, because it used to be the top damage dealer in the shotgun category, and then also be, you know, the Scorpio. Nowadays, it's just the Scorpio still, but it doesn't have that damage component to that degree. It's still powerful enough to burn some enemies down, of course. If we take it into the game, this one is actually exactly saved as there, except, well, the Scorpio isn't in, but I do have some of those other weapons that we were showing on that picture as well. The Scorpio, of course, is going to be in this character's inventory. It is saved with other builds. So here I'm using that place to have it be other weapons so I can have some choices. I'm pairing it here with the Tsunami and then also a Black Market SASG with Killer here. Pretty talentable, so I can play around with that. I likely as well have other weapons like a Brazen military M870 here, and all of those, this kind of being my character that does carry a little bit of shotguns, all can be choices. There's also something to be said for an ACS. They are actually the Burst King in that category. But you don't have that much reserve ammo, so you end up running out of ammo quite often with them. You can mitigate that a little bit by Pummel, because Pummel, like a lot of talents that are designed around the magazine and refilling it, they pull ammo from the void. They don't actually take from your ammo reserves, they just pull it out of the warp, just directly out of Korn's lap, and yeah, don't worry about it, he won't come and get you. Of course he won't. And yeah, here of course, a close range build, we are pairing it with Firewall. Firewall is my go-to if it's a very close range build. Firewall is my go-to. Any Intimidate build is going to be that already. And we're especially doing that here for this Striker Shield. The Striker Shield has a damage bonus per enemy, and normally you could take a few blue cores. Quite often I find myself, especially with this build, just running it, for instance, with the Memento. The Memento, again, especially solo, really strong, of course, when we are getting those kills. This is also one of those builds that gets close enough to the enemy that we're going to pick up the short time buffs, because we're just going to kill the enemy, run over them, grab it, just to, of course, also get our Intimidate going, the bonus armor especially, and then we're just going to keep going. But also what we get, of course, with the Memento is that we get all of those other bonuses as well, with the skill efficiency for the shield, for instance, but also the regen that we get from there. And also, if we are picking those short timer buffs, depending on how many cores we have, so for instance, here we have 6 red cores, we get 30% weapon damage on top as well, which of course adds to our punch by quite a lot. We're going to pair that with a Revive Hive. This is a full red build as we see here, even though, yeah, if we're taking the Memento, we do have some survivability to that. But there's also nothing wrong, and you can kind of see that here. I have it kind of set up where 3 out of the 4 Hunter's Fury pieces can be set up to be blue cores, so that we can play around with how many red or blue cores we can have here. Especially with the Scorpio, you can't take it full red because you're stun locking the enemy in front of you, and you should be making it just 1 versus 1. So you should just be kind of going around the outsides and just killing whatever stragglers there are until you've killed basically everything. With that Scorpio, you can just stun lock people effectively, and as long as you keep some tall cover between you and other enemies, it'll work out fine. This is a very aggressive build and does require a decent playtime investment to kind of get the hang of. I feel this isn't, if you're just coming from a striker or such, one that will directly feel native, but you have a lot of tools through Hunter's Fury to actually be aggressive. That armor on kill helps quite a lot. Even that health on kill that we have helps a lot. And yeah, the disorient on kill, if you kill one of the enemies, so especially if you have like a group of enemies together and there is one red there, I'm going to focus down that red, kill them. As long as we're close enough, they will disorient the other enemies around them, and that buys us all the time, of course, to get the rest to join them. And yeah, overall a build that I definitely enjoy. This is really a great shotgun build. And for instance, unlike the OD one, the ongoing directive one we saw in character 1, that was kind of set up for shotguns where it opens it up for the Tinker and such. Here we don't want to take the chest or the backpack of Hunter's Fury. Because of that, we're kind of locked into, yeah, either chest exotics or backpack exotics. You can, of course, also run this with Ridgeway, and that's also one of the ways that I've enjoyed it. You can take Wicked on the backpack, Ridgeway on the chest, and then that opens up also Sadist for the shotguns. That can be actually a way to set this up as well. It is yeah, Hunter's Fury is one of those quintessential builds to kind of try out over time. It is very aggressive, especially in Summit. I love this, as there also you have a lot of tall cover in missions and such. It works out. For activities out in the open world, you find yourself quite often that there is a little bit too much open space, and yeah, that can get you killed. Going back to this build picture here, yeah, it is a decently easy build to get together, of course. It is all red core pieces, and even the brands we're using are red core. For the chest and the backpack, I would definitely recommend trying to hold out if you want to go this route to make it that it is free talentable. As you can see, I've basically optimized all 3 stats. I've gotten a chest with crit chance and crit damage already on it, and then optimize everything up just so we can play around with that talent. That is, of course, with a lot of gear, the way to go about things, because we definitely want to play around, for instance, yeah, on the backpack to maybe go Bloodsucker, or maybe go even other talents than that, maybe even future talents if we get some. And yeah, on the chest, we can go Intimidate. We can also, for instance, go Unbreakable, although if you're going Unbreakable, you might as well bring in the perfect Unbreakable chest, the Badger Tough one. Yeah, and there is a lot of ways of kind of playing around with this build, of course. Take this as kind of the basis and then try to form it out to fit your playstyle, because yeah, you can add some blue cores if you need to, you can add in a memento, and all of those things can eat into the damage a little bit, but this already has so much damage, and that's actually the way that I like playing it, is just to be, because of how much damage we kind of have here, we can, as long as we're just fighting an enemy or 2 at a time, we can just burn through them pretty quickly. And then for 13, we've already seen a future initiative FI being used in several ways. We've seen a yellow FI, just a full-on healer. We've seen a red FI. Here we have a blue FI. BlueFi is, as this one is kind of called. And what we're trying to do here is actually, as we discussed with the FIs, is that they have a really strong buff, 25 total weapon damage to the entire team if we are using the chest, 15 without, 25 total weapon damage and total skill damage as well to the team, as long as each of the players is at their full armor. When they are at their full armor, they receive the buff, and that is individually through everybody. Especially with 7 other players in things like Countdown, this can be actually a pretty strong build. And then what this is trying to do is protect that armor, or protect that buff, by protecting the armor. We are trying to create some bonus armor on our allies through this Lavoisier, and whenever bonus armor gets hit, we discussed it already for Vigilance, whenever a shield or bonus armor gets hit, you don't lose Vigilance actually. Same is true for the FI buff. Until you lose armor, actual white armor, if just blue armor is getting hit, that doesn't actually remove the FI buff from you. Until your normal armor is actually depleted by any amount, yeah, it is going to have that buff be upon you. So this is trying to do that. We are trying to, with the Scorpio here, especially the Disorient and the Shock of it, will trigger Lavoisier whenever it is off cooldown. And that will give a bonus armor depending on our armor. That's also why we are taking a few blue cores. It gives that to all of the allies within 30 meters of that enemy. And 30 meters, 60 meter radius, or a 30 meter radius, a 60 meter diameter, that's a pretty big circle. And that works out decently well. That's why we are taking the Lavoisier, the named variant of that perfect galvanize. And then, yeah, we're taking 4 pieces of the FI with the chest, and then also, again, taking the BTSU data glove. As we've discussed several times, I'm a big fan of the BTSU data gloves. They are a really strong tool, especially when we're buffing also 8 people with it. Now, in the case of the supercharge that we want out of this, as we discussed with the red FI as well, is that we can deconstruct the hive that we have here, which is actually a healing hive. We can deconstruct that, and that will put us at skill tier 6, which is a requirement to make it a supercharge affecting everybody. When we overcharge everybody else, we do need to be at skill tier 6. We aren't, of course, here. But when we first trigger it, we are for 15 seconds while we are overcharged. Then we can do it again, deconstruct another hive. That does take some time, of course, but we can deconstruct another hive and supercharge the team. And that can be one of the strongest tools within the game. A well-placed supercharge can, save entire teams. It can reset everybody's revive hives, for instance, but also it gives them overcharged skills. If being used, for instance, with a shield, that's invincible for the duration of that. A pulse can give a damage debuff. The smart covers, if any people have them, they can be very strong. Any thrown out decoys, they are super effective. So a supercharge is that level strong that we are actually putting it in here in a build where we're trying to do blue core things. But yeah, here we do want that, and then also that gives us a decently usable hive because it does feed a decent amount of from the skill tiers. For each skill tier, we get 15 skill haste for the hive, meaning that we have 30 here because of the from skill tiers at least. We get one from the technician, and of course this has a yellow core. We also have a skill haste there, and we have some from the watch as well. That does help the hive to be somewhat usable in its healing form. And this is just to help off a little bit of that chip damage. If people get hit before we get the bonus armor on them, of course, if they get hit before it and then they get the bonus armor, they are still not at full armor, of course. So we do want to heal them up underneath that. So I do toss this out quite often if I remember to. We are, of course, using a shield as well. We do have a few blue cores, so we might as well go that route. We actually have a 6-0 shield, which just have a decent amount of protection. Not, of course, we can't take a hunter hit the way that, for instance, a PFE build can. But yeah, we can stun lock them or try to, and give bonus armor to ourselves and allies as well, because this does work upon ourselves, of course, as well. And then, have that shield still be in their face. If we take it into the game, we see actually that I do have this one saved as well as the 5-piece, because I do that with a lot of builds where I do want to play around with what exotics we take or other pieces of gear. Now, by saving it as this 5-piece, now, of course, that BTSU is the option that I'm kind of presenting there. But also what we saw in the corner was that because the shock, any shock will also trigger the galvanize. One of the things we can take is actually shocker punch and then Elmo, and then we can do that from a little bit more distance, especially once you have the shock runs on the Elmo. One of the things I find myself sometimes doing is we take the shocker punch, we take the Elmo, we have the shield already, we can punch enemies to trigger the shock, of course, but then also just by itself, the Elmo, one thing we can do is just once the shock runs are on it, while you're charging it up, if you swap weapon, you will lose all charge that you've built up, all of the stacks that you've built up. But once you have the shock rounds, you can swap to a secondary weapon. And that's also why I have this LMG here instead of the lefty actually that we had there. That lefty, of course, is in this character's inventory, so it doesn't need to per se. Here, I can always pull it to their inventory if I need to. But I like actually having another weapon running the Elmo as the main, getting the shock rounds on it, and then basically, for instance, during extraction, I'll swap to that, hit an enemy once, give everybody bonus armor, swap to, for instance, this LMG that I have here, keep shooting that. Once everybody's bonus armor dissipates, go back to it. And that can work well enough. But the Scorpio, of course, can stun lock an enemy into place, and that's very nice, especially with the starting hunters in Countdown, for instance. This definitely, to me, is a Countdown build, and yeah, I can set it up in multiple ways by saving it at this 5 pieces. I do find myself using it mostly, though, with that BTSU glove. That overcharge mechanic is that strong. Going back to the build picture, yeah, we are taking actually even yellow core pieces, and we want red minor attributes on them, and then blue coring it as well. Now, of course, blue coring it or red coring it doesn't per se matter for this gear. It will always come with yellow, so going red or blue doesn't, that part doesn't matter too much, but these are somewhat the harder pieces to get. You will always kind of need some optimization, as we see here as well. BDSU Daily Glove is generally available. The Lavoisier is not too hard of a name to farm. It is just in the electric pool. It isn't a DZ item or such. Because of that, easy enough to get. Scorpio, of course, also in the general pool, and also its blueprint is available through Retaliation. So pretty easy pieces there to get. The harder part is getting, the red FI/blue FI pieces that we have here. One of the things you can do as well is if you try this, or if you have a red core FI, you could actually, for instance, if you do want to try this out, just changing the cores to blue, several cores, sticking a Lavoisier in there instead of, for instance, on the red FIs, what we have is generally a Cheska backpack with either Vigilance or Safeguard. And of course, that BTSU is still there. So actually, we can kind of swap this out to a red FI pretty easily because, it's going to be those cores anyway. One that I wouldn't highly recommend, but especially if you do a lot of countdowns, this can be a decent build for in there. The FI buff, when it is applied to 7 other players, is pretty strong, and this, in kind of giving a little bit of CC and a little bit of bonus armor, does something unique. Overall, though, I would say it is trying to do too much, and because of that, it isn't doing any of it too well. This is definitely the master of none, and that is still fine though, because it is quite often, as stated, the jack of all trades, master of none. There's actually a continuation to that, which is that it is still oftentimes better than a master of one. And I would say that that still holds true. I would still take this over, for instance, a full heal FI in countdown, mostly because it can do more than that. And a full healer is kind of wasted in countdown. So trying to at least get the FI buff out of this, and then maybe, for instance, having a foam eclipse alongside of it, and then just 6 other damage dealers will still make mincemeat out of heroic countdown. 414. The Heartbreaker TechTank, although a variation of it now, because I used to have actually the TechTank, the Heartbreaker TechTank was actually one of those builds that I had 2 of them. As I often have said, I don't want to have direct copies, exact copies in the build collection, but I did actually with the Heartbreaker TechTank. But there was really only one way to set it up that was kind of, obviously the correct way. That was with a Cheska mask, or a Cheska piece in there, and I was setting it up with especially Flatline. Now, Killer was always an option for it as well, but I generally went with Flatline. Flatline would be much more consistent. You could put Killer in there, but then you would lose a little bit when it isn't active, of course, or lose quite a bit when it isn't active, and you would still gain it quite a bit over Flatline, but I preferred the consistency. So what did change? Now, the incoming of unit alloys here that we have with the salvo especially as well means that we can lose a little bit more crit. Because of that, the killer becomes a little bit bigger. If our crit is lower and we can take different bonuses that are equivalent, especially of course as well, if the other bonuses are not of the same same equivalency, then it isn't worth it, of course. We don't, for instance, just take headshot or something, or other stats or skill damage. Those wouldn't be equivalent. But here, because we have that rate of fire now, we can kind of eat into our crit damage. And effectively what this build has is all crit chances all around. It doesn't have one crit damage on the build itself, meaning that this killer is one of the bigger killers that we can see, which is a 26% on when it's activated. That, of course, versus the 15% from Flatline, which would be consistent. And here, of course, we are going to take that Link Laser Pointer because we need that for Heartbreaker already. Here, that 26% is quite significantly bigger, of course. So by setting it up in the salvo way, we're opening up a bigger gap for killer, and then I'm okay choosing it because, if we're taking a killer that is around 20% versus Flatline that is always on and 15%, that wasn't too big of a gap, but 26%, now we're talking. So because of this new bonuses that we can have here by changing in the brand bonus and changing in a stat here, that works out in its favor. That does mean, though, that the killer activation rate, though, is quite low on this. And that does mean that, that eats a little bit into our joy, but it still works out more than well enough. Our killer activation rate is still into the 70%, and that means that 2 out of 3 kills, we will get killer activated. So in places where getting enough kills, this is definitely a Heartbreaker TechTank variant to consider. Then we should actually, yes, talk about what a Heartbreaker TechTank actually is. We're, of course, using Heartbreaker here mostly with blue cores as well. We're just recording one of the pieces. And TechTanks, as we've kind of often discussed throughout this video, but if you're maybe just watching this segment, TechTanks are a layout where we're taking a memento, we're taking an artificer hive, which requires technician, that is the tech in the TechTank, and we're taking a shield, the tank in the TechTank. The memento feeds basically into all parts of this because we're feeding into the weapon damage side, we're feeding into the skill efficiency sides, which both helps the artificer and the shield. We can see that before the memento is full, it's these stats, and then the memento being full is signified here. With the memento full, we're healing that shield for 42% every 10 seconds, and we don't need to deploy the artificer. Even on our back, it always works, and we'll send the charge every 10 seconds to our shield, even when it doesn't have charges due to, for instance, cool skills or scavenge skills or such. If it's on your back, it will always send that charge every 10 seconds. And that heals this shield for 42% of its health. And this health is, of course, also affected by the memento, its skill efficiency feeding into this. That means that this is more than 2 million split over, once per 10 seconds. If we split it onto the second mark, that means that we're basically regenning 200,000 or more even, actually. We're kind of rounding down, actually. More than 200,000 health on the shield every second, effectively. That is way more than any regen build could ever really conceive to get to. And because of that, we have a very strong shield, and then the rest of the build is kind of going towards the damage. We generally do so with gear sets. We've already seen it in an Umbra form, in a CoCo form, in a Striker, of course, form. And here we're seeing the Heartbreaker. With Heartbreaker, we do want to take that chest. That chest is the good part of Heartbreaker. We generally want to avoid the backpack, and that works out in the Heartbreaker's favor here as well, as the damage on this Heartbreaker TechTank is actually pretty equivalent to the Striker one. And because of that, it works out to be actually that the Heartbreaker TechTank and the Striker TechTank are both kind of both of my favorites. The Striker one still can stack up faster. Because of that, effectively, it does more damage. Even though at full stacks, this Heartbreaker one actually does more damage. But yeah, because we need to here stack with a stack broker or an ACS in general, where with the Striker one, we don't really need to. I do like both. And then also on the Heartbreaker, we have that bonus armor that we get at the start. By just getting our stacks up, we're also getting bonus armor. That can be a pretty good opening survivability, letting us be pretty aggressive with it. And that's kind of my play style with it as well. We really rush the enemy down, get some stacks going, and then we just start mowing them down. Especially with this killer one, yeah, there's definitely something to be said for the one we'll see as well on character 5, which is the old style where we are still taking Cheska and Flatline, because if we aren't taking killer, it still makes more sense. The Cheska is actually bigger than Salvo, especially here because the crit is pretty low. The Cheska already beats out, even in burst, it beats it out. And of course, with unit alloy or a Salvo, we are actually losing quite a bit in the damage per mag and in the sustained DPS. But we are stacking a little bit faster because especially with the Salvo, we're getting 10% rate of fire, 5% from here, 5% from the brand bonus. And this help out a little bit with the stacking, but not a large amount. If we take it out into the game, we see that it is exactly saved as that. There is actually one minor difference. If we go back here, actually, you'll notice that this Salvo, the core is record, and here as well, we're keeping a blue core actually on the mask here. When I go into the game, we see that that is actually reversed. I'm taking a blue core on the Salvo, and then this is actually record with a blue, or with 2 red from the blue. It is actually better to set it up as we have it on the build picture, and this is just a quirk that I can reuse this. We're reusing the mask between this and the red Heartbreaker we saw earlier. Because of that, I want to use as many pieces between those two builds. Because of that, I'm taking 2 pieces here, and yeah, we're keeping those red core. And instead, it's for me, the Salvo that is only being used here, that might as well be the blue core. But of course, yeah, that means recoring a piece that was already blue to red, and then here a piece that was already red to blue. So for the build picture, I do take the time to actually swap those things around just to make it a little bit more easy. You know, people will sometimes copy it very directly and miss out that that isn't needed. They could have had an easier time if they went the easier route. But for me, it works out better this way because yeah, we are reusing actually those 2 pieces in the Heartbreaker, just the RedBreaker. up here. So this way I can use them there, of course. And yeah, sharing between builds, definitely something I always consider when I can. That's also why, for instance, yeah, the Heartbreaker, this Heartbreaker is on this character, where they also have the Heartbreaker TechTank, just so you can reuse some pieces, opening up some inventory space for me. Yeah, we are taking here, of course, the Memento. We do want to charge up the Memento over time. We're mostly considering it with the long time buff. So I'm not per se going out of my way to go and in the fights pick up those pickups. It's mostly after the fight I'll just charge up the Memento. Even though by playing aggressively, sometimes I do pick them up in the middle of the fight just to have a little bit more bonus armor, and then actually we can put the shield away and actually just face tank with the blue armor. That salvo does help it quite a bit to get a little bit more stacks going, but it does definitely also eat more ammo. The biggest downsides I've felt with this one is, yeah, the killer activation rate is a little bit low for what I would want out of it. Quite often I find myself, oh, I'm still without killer even after a few kills. And because of that, I think I'm leaning still more towards, yeah, the old variant, the old-fashioned way of going Cheska and taking flatline instead. But there's, of course, nothing stopping me here from taking that flatline. But yeah, as we discussed, if we are taking flatline, the Cheska actually beats out the unit alloy piece here, or the salvo piece in particular as well. So that would be the better choice overall. But I could still take that if we need the consistency. And of course, it being a Lexington, we can go that route. If you don't have a Lexington as well, one of the choices you could make here, of course, there's a recommended weapons list. But yeah, either the P416 or the M4 can be really good choices there. And yeah, they can be with flatline or killer as well. We do take the linked laser pointer, of course, from Technician. That is already here for the tech tank part, but we also kind of need that to be there for Heartbreaker for its pulsing mechanic. Going back to its build picture, we have, yeah, we're recording one piece here, even though I have to record two pieces there. We're recording one piece from blue to red, and that is pretty easy because for the most of the rest of it, you can find pieces that have very high armor, and even if you don't optimize the armor up, because just there being an armor core there already feeds into the shield, and that's like the important part of it. You could actually leave some of these armor bars not fully maxed out, not optimize them up, and just put a stat alongside of them, getting the mods, getting the Memento, and then yeah, the salvo, of course, available one from the season track even. Keeping the red score, you can just put crit chance alongside of it. Overall, yeah, Lexington generally available from some of the special events. Of course, the current Krampus event has them in its caches, but quite often now they've put them in the stretch goal, so that will be the consistent way to get it. Otherwise, you can go with a plethora of other weapons, and the Kingbreaker as well actually should be in here. Stack Broker, actually, as you saw in the game, I didn't actually have the Stack Broker on this character. So far, we only have one Stack Broker, and that's kind of staying in my stash and being only used when I really, really need it. In the future, when I get more of them, because currently we only have access to getting one per account, in the future likely it'll be in stretch goals, and then we can start loading up some of the characters that way. Overall, a very highly recommended build. This is my go-to solo build. This and the Striker Tech Tank are the two that I will generally, yeah, very much gravitate to. Each is on a different character, of course, as well, and it is my go-to on any of them whenever I'm doing anything of importance solo. Once it is charged up, it is very strong. It fits my playstyle really well by being very aggressive. And because of that, yeah, it is one of the higher recommended builds and is pretty high up there. Why it isn't the highest recommended as well with the tech tanks is that, yeah, you do need to get a Memento. That can take a little bit. It is in the general pool and you can get the blueprints from Retaliation, but yeah, it isn't an item you are born with. And Technician also, if you don't own the Ultimate Edition, you need to unlock. So that can take a little bit of time. That's why just the general Striker is recommended, because you can just get that together quickly. But if you get a little bit further and you do play solo quite a bit, as we all do, either making a Heartbreaker or a Striker Tech Tank is highly, highly recommended. And then on 4.15, we see a new addition actually to the build collection, but not a new style for this slot actually even. We are looking at a PFE here set up to have 2.5% regen. We're going with 2-piece Golem and 1-piece Bellstone. 1.5% from the 2-piece Golem, 1% from the Bellstone for 2.5% regen. And this is a style that I've been wanting to try out. They are very common. I've seen them quite a lot. I had actually, well, we have a different regen one on character 1, as we saw, but that one's very much set up for instance, Countdown, and then with Galvanize and Vanguard on it. A much more defensive setup. Here on this character, I used to have the Ridgeway setup, and I was quite often frustrated by it. It is still a good setup, and I stand by it, but I wanted something different. The Ridgeway one, we had Ridgeway effectively, and then 2 damage brands alongside of it. We were taking a weapon with Sadist. That is the thing that then Ridgeway was opening up for us. When we were getting close to the enemy, we were bleeding them. We could take a Sadist weapon. We're kind of losing the chest talent, but then we're gaining a little bit back through the damage talent on the weapon. And then the Ridgeway, of course, providing us a little bit of regen alongside of it. The big downside of that is mechanicals don't bleed. Whenever we have a lot of masters recently, and yeah, there's a lot of black disc in them. Mini tanks, warhounds, yeah, they don't bleed, and especially as well when there's bosses in them where they don't bleed. Yeah, it became kind of frustrating through that. So I wanted to change it up for this character, because quite often on them I would be annoyed of like, oh, we have a fight, but it doesn't work for this. It will work well against rogues and such still, but even there, against their skills, it was very weak, because also, again, they didn't bleed. So say this would not be active, we wouldn't get our regen going. So I wanted to try something else for this character. This is a very common style that has been around, and especially what this is, of course, doing is that we are bringing in Hunter Killer. And Hunter Killer by itself is not going to be worth it. If we're just taking Intimidate, we're just going to take Cheska with normal Intimidate. That's much more valuable with the brand bonus there. The Intimidate, this one, is a tiny bit more at max stacks, even on build. But, of course, that Cheska is quite a bit ahead before Intimidate comes in. So whenever we also don't trigger Intimidate, having the brand bonus be something strong really helps out, of course. And the difference between them is very, very marginal between Perfect and normal Intimidate. Because of that, we generally don't recommend Hunter Killer. So why am I still using it here for the 2-piece? Because the 2-piece is, of course, regen. If we are going for some regen with that Bellstone alongside of it, now it kind of makes more sense. We are wasting 1 brand bonus. We are wasting that status effect that we have here. We're not doing any status effects here, unless we pull out our flamethrower maybe. Or actually, when we armor break, we will set enemies nearby on fire. But the 1 status effect roll is not going to make that feel any different. But we're basically wasting that to get that 1.5% and then getting ourselves the Bellstone here. Overall, this is a setup that I've been kind of enjoying, and then also this, because of the weird kind of quirk with a lot of the other ones, for instance, with the SMG one we saw earlier, we did take, for instance, some weapon handling rolls. In here, I've chosen for a different one, and that's the Chameleon. Chameleon's biggest issue is range. This is a build that's going to be pretty close up. It is also a build that is mostly blue cord. It is 4 blue cores in total, and we can't even go 6. As you can see, I have it set up that I can go even 2 more blue cores if I need to. And of course, how many blue cores we have, our armor is a percentage regen, so that would also increase our regen by quite a bit by going 6 blues for the places that we need that. The Chameleon works out well enough. It is kind of slow to get going, but once it is going and we have those bonuses up, especially I go for the legs first just to get that reload bonus in, and then we go for the body to get that weapon damage bonus in. And that head bonus isn't too big here because we are rocking a decent amount of crit. It's nothing special, but it is still there, of course. Those losses of brand bonuses going towards damage definitely make this feel a little bit weaker than some of the other PFEs that I have, but it feels perfectly fine. And we are landing with the Chameleon here on 61 crit chance total. That does mean, though, that the headshot 20 crit chance we're kind of completely foregoing and not considering at all. I'm mostly going for that weapon damage bonus that we have on the body. If we take it out into the game, we see that, it is saved exactly as it is shown there. And this has become, one that I've enjoyed for the places we use PFE. So for instance, in Countdown, especially during extraction, having 1 PFE player like this, especially if they are aggressive and can push into the enemy, that can be pretty strong because they can go kind of into the middle of the enemy in the back, especially with Adrenaline Rush, because it will trigger off of 3 enemies. We get 60% bonus armor. Especially with also the 75% PFE that we have here, that can last us quite a bit. And every 5 seconds, it re-triggers. So every 5 seconds, we have 60% bonus armor to lose in the middle of a pack like that. really only if we get hit by the axes of the hunters do we really land in a little bit of trouble. But even them, they will not take us to Healthgate with these 4 cores on challenging at least. Here as well then, yeah, I do have 3 13 PFEs here, and then 3 12 PFEs. These are my other 3 13 PFEs. I have 9 in total, 6 we've seen already on character 3. And the 75 that we have here, because yeah, if we had all 13 BFEs, we could be 78, is enough already for me to, for instance, go with this firewall. This firewall, of course, giving the bonus damage to my allies, any enemy I'm within 10 meters of, every ally, and this is actually one of those quirks as well. Some things, like the bonus to status affected enemies, is just your subgroup. This one is actually allies, and it does also work that way, which is all allies. So, for instance, if I am in the middle of the pack during the extraction, I'm giving 10% to all 7 players alongside of me. And then, of course, we're also taking that for that striker shield for an extra damage here. And here as well, we have even 13% on it because we do have definitely a few blue cores here, giving it a few tiers, and that does up this damage. And this is also per enemy within that core. Overall, this is a decent way of setting this up. That regen does feel good. 2.5% means that every 40 seconds, we get the entirety of our armor bar back. So if we were to lose it all the way in 40 seconds, it would be all the way back up. That isn't fast, but it isn't slow either. We will get our health and armor back, and that means that while we're fighting, we can just keep fighting, and even if we lose a little bit of our armor, we don't have to consider of like, oh, I need to disengage to go into corner to met back up, or, well, hopefully the healer heals me. No, I'm taking care of myself, and because of that, this does actually work out decently well. And while that Chameleon, I still kind of, stand by it a little bit. Scorpio definitely will be an option there as well. And for some of the fights, if I were to take this, for instance, into Recruiter, where it's much more important that the player that is running PFE is kind of disabling the Recruiter, I would choose that. But if I need to do a little bit of damage, and this build can do an okay amount of damage. It isn't, of course, one of the gear sets or a striker or a CoCo or tipping scales or anything like that, but it can do enough damage, and that's also important to keep the enemy focused on me. I can, if I'm shooting an enemy, especially once we have the mid buff up on the Chameleon, getting that 90% weapon damage. Once I have that up, I can actually keep an hunter, especially if I'm close to them, because proximity matters a lot for threat and aggro as well. We can keep them focused on me and not shooting my allies, for instance, making it so that also for rogue fights and such, I can kind of run at the rogues, especially in a group setting, and kind of keep them still focused on me by doing enough damage, letting my allies just tear away at them. And yeah, that is the play style of the PFEs, and definitely a style that, yeah, on every character I have a PFE build because they come very much in handy for rogue fights, for some other fights as well, especially some of the master missions. For some sections, they can be the prime pick. This one is not the highest recommended, I would say. I really like the shotgun one I have on character 5. I really like the SMG one that I have on character 3. Both of those have a lot more damage because some of those brand bonuses are going towards that, and also some of the exotics that they have. But this one definitely feels perfectly fine. We are giving up a little bit of damage. We are getting regen in return for that. That is a trade-off that is worth making. The Chameleon works out fine on it, and this has become definitely an addition that I feel is worth it, as, yeah, it definitely is not as frustrating as that Ridgeway one, which did have a little bit more damage than this, but yeah, not always. And this one can be a little bit more consistent, although how consistent is that Chameleon? Definitely have a Scorpio on hand for when that matters, and yeah, when we go into maybe something where we really need a little bit more tanking, we can actually choose to go even more blue cores. And of course on this, I could even go Bulwark with a Tempest, for instance, to keep enemies on me, or even a Mosquito. So that opens up a lot of options because we are kind of agnostic about what weapon types we're using. We can even go with a Bulwark. Overall, I do recommend having a PFE in your loadout slots. Would it be this one? Maybe I would lean more towards the shotgun one, but this one definitely as a variant, pretty powerful. And on 4.16, we have a full-on raid tank. This is the go-to layout of an Iron Horse raid tank, if you can make it this way, because yeah, we do have one rarer item. We'll come to that in a second. But this is then the setup that we take for having full hazard protection, which is needed for the Iron Horse raids. and for segments of it at least. And then alongside of that, we're taking some regen, and of course, we're just fully bluing it. We have one job in there. We might as well do it the best we can. And this is one of those few places that, yeah, we do use tanked builds. As you have seen, I have some tanky builds, but most of the tanky builds, even the tech tanks, or even those PFEs that we saw, most of them are taking red stats underneath it because, while you can take a few blue cores, the blue stats mostly for general play are not worth it. This, for instance, wouldn't be a good way for tanking legendaries or something, even though, as well, just mechanically, it's not worth it to tank legendaries. It's much more useful to heal legendaries. It's much more useful to foam legendaries, especially, than it is to try to tank it. And most of it comes down to mechanics. We don't have good mechanics for tanks. In a lot of games, we would have things like taunt and stuff. And I would love, actually, for them to either to the shields or to, for instance, some of the talents like Vanguards, apply a threat thing. In Division 1, actually, the shield has threat. When you pull it out, it actually generates threat, so you don't have to do too much damage to the enemy for them to focus on you. Here, if you were to use this, for instance, in just 4-man heroic or something, no enemy is going to point at you and shoot at you. They're just going to shoot at the damage dealers when they shoot at them. Because of that, it's just a Vanguard that can be useful. It's kind of tanky and can be in the face of the enemies, but that's not that useful. You're much better off being, for instance, yeah, something even like a tech tank or a PFE that would provide a lot more damage and actually be able to take some of that aggro. But the story is completely different in the raids. In the raids, we do have mechanics for tanking. For instance, some of the enemies, if you stagger them in certain ways, they will focus down the person that is staggering them. And also we have things like the mosquito actually available when we really need to keep the attention of a boss or something away from the red builds. And for instance, also in the raid settings, it is important that this is 1 out of 8 builds instead of 1 out of 4 in legendary and incursion and such. Tanky builds don't work out there well because also it is a quarter of the team. So you're giving up a quarter of the team's damage effectively. In the raids, of course, it's only 12.5%. That's also why in 8-man content, tankier builds kind of work out a little bit better just because relatively they're less of the team. And this, though, is then set up, yeah, with the chill out. And we're taking the chill out here just to have extra protection from elite mods here available. And then also going with 3 pieces of Gila. So we have 2% regen from 3 pieces Gila. Also the armor from that. And then the Bellstone for a 3rd%. So we have 3% regen on this build itself. We're pairing that actually with some protection from elites. There's even a few armor regen rolls on it, mostly because there isn't that much other things to take. We could take explosive resistance, but that comes into play just in a few places and doesn't make enough of a difference anyway. So we are taking enough hazard protection, and that's also what the 2 pieces Cavalier are for. They do have 30% hazard protection on the 2-piece, and with all of that combined, we are hazard protected against everything. So we are hazard immune effectively, and that's needed in the Iron Horse raid for certain purposes of that. Outside that, you wouldn't per se need to have that, because even if you wanted to have, towards 1 status effect or something like Disruption, you would be better off, for instance, taking a few mods and such. Here, though, we are taking the Chill Out Mask. When we are taking the Chill Out Mask, we do get those extra protection from Elite from there. We could just forego this being the Chill Out, and then instead of the Chill Out, just have a Gila Mask. You would lose one of the protection from Elites. That does hurt a little bit, and there is actually in the build collection and also in the recommended build list another layout where we are taking it a little bit differently, where we are taking it with an improvised piece to still keep around the same amount of PFE. But yeah, that is a much more annoying setup to get to because you also need an Imperial Guard for it, which is easy enough if you have the blueprint, but outside of that, not easy enough to get. If we take it out into the game, we see that it is saved exactly as shown there. There's really only one variant to it. We are taking it also with a Bulwark and a Revive Hive. The Revive Hive just to revive ourselves if in case we do go down. The Liberty, because yeah, we're pairing it with a Bulwark. The tanking as well is mostly done through a shield. We can't, even this build can't face tank legendary for longer than like 4 seconds. You will get destroyed. The things that can tank are shields. So for instance, here having a shield that is 17 million, that can tank. Because yeah, we ourselves are 2.5 combined. And then, yeah, one thing that can help with that is the Liberty, as long as we are body shotting and then headshotting once in a while. Headshots consume all of these stacks that we can make there, and we repair our shield for that amount. The other tool that has become one of the go-tos for this build is actually the Mosquito. This can keep one enemy kind of forcefully targeting us. This is one of the very few ways that we have to actually make aggro happen consistently, especially for a build that is like this. As we discussed with, for instance, the PFEs and such, aggro mostly works around damage and proximity. Being close to the enemy, if you are closer to the enemy, you don't have to do as much damage as somebody further away from the enemy, but the damage still needs to be there. If a further away enemy or a further away, well, ally of yours, enemy to the enemy, if one of your teammates is shooting, let's say, a hunter or something in Countdown, and they are a striker and you are this build, even if you are up in the face of the hunter, you cannot pull it off of that striker if it's doing its full damage. It will do just so much damage that it will fill the threat meter basically so fast that it will aggro onto them. And that's one of the reasons why, yeah, again, tank builds outside of certain situations don't get used much. But those certain situations do exist, for instance, Iron Horse, and yeah, this is kind of the go-to setup for that. It is very tanky, way too tanky, actually even for Iron Horse, way too tanky, but you have one job, and that job needs to get done, so it might as well be as set up as possible. We're taking it here with Vanguard. One of the things you can take as well in the backpack slot is actually, instead of Adrenaline Rush, taking Protector in several places in Iron Horse. That does work out, but it's minor differences, but yeah, just some of the options. You can always, if you are with the team, a reasonably experienced team, you can just ask as well, hey, what talents or what recommendations do you have? Most raid teams will definitely have some setup ideas of their own. This one, though, I do keep in the collection and on this character just for the few times a year that I end up in an Iron Horse raid. Outside of that, I do sometimes use this for some testing, especially the hazard protection of it. And that's honestly as well. The reason it has stayed in a loadout slot is just I do sometimes grab it just if we need to test something tankily. Yeah, that does work out with this. It is one of the tankier builds that we have. And the 3% regen every 33 seconds, we're filling back up basically at 2 million armor. And that means that we are regenning a decent chunk of our armor every second. As yeah, we have around 72k armor regen, and that can be pretty useful. But I wouldn't recommend this outside of if you are planning on doing Iron Horse. It isn't too hard to get together, especially those two pieces Cavalier. They do come with blue cores, of course. So yeah, you just find the piece and then just optimize it up, or especially finding a hazard protected piece as well. You can optimize that up, but honestly, you don't need to. The chill out is only available through seasonal things, and yeah, likely in the future, Valentine's will likely be the next event that we get, where the Hoarder will be in a special mode, and then you can try to farm for the chill out. But the chill out isn't per se needed. You can go with other things, just lose a little bit of that protection from elite. The other pieces are pretty easy to get. The point pen is generally available. Liberty is through its own quest line kind of thing, where you get a piece from Capital first, then there are 3 other missions. You can look it up online. It isn't available through Retaliation because it is one of those exotics that is crafted. Because of that, there is no Retaliation drop. Also, you would need to get one first from that quest chain kind of, where you do Capital, and then there is the 3 missions close to Capital that you kind of do, but it needs to be in a certain order, so just look it up, as I don't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, you do need to basically get a Liberty first, and then more can drop, so you can't just farm for it. Mosquito, though, is generally available in those loot pools. Overall, yeah, not recommended unless you're doing raids or some testing sometimes. That's mostly what I end up using this one more for. Places where we need to check what hazard protection is needed, I can play around with this, remove a hazard protection, add one in, and because of that, yeah, I do sometimes use it, but yeah, definitely not needed unless you want to go for these roles. And then one last thing before we actually round it out here, even though this video is turning pretty long, I just wanted to have an eulogy here because yeah, I used to have a lot of Cheska chest on characters. And especially one of the standout things, of course, that we've seen throughout all of these, at least update-wise, is the equalizer coming in. The equalizer is the strong unit alloy piece. In a lot of other builds, yeah, unit alloys doesn't per se always make sense, especially, for instance, for Striker. For Chest Striker, I still go my Cheska route. But yeah, we still have, for instance, some Cheska chests still in here. But yeah, we are gathered here today to remember the sacrifices that weren't sacrifices because they were Cheska chests. But yeah, they helped us through a lot. And yeah, now as we can see, several of them, there are 4 of them in the stash, all graded to 12. Guess where they came from? All of them with Obliterate. And you still, of course, have some, for instance, yeah, for instance, here being some super unicorns with Obliterate, so we can record them those armor, and of course, yeah, the PvP super unicorn there. I'm not gonna keep all of these. They take up, well, even though I've cleaned up my stash and it is empty enough to keep them, I will likely start getting rid of some of these. We'll keep some of the better looking ones, but some of these are, I feel, going out, even though they are, yeah, optimized and guard, well, at this point, guard rolled and free talentable. We don't need that many of them anymore. Because especially, yeah, for Obliterate, equalizers, but Intimidate and such, and maybe some other talent. Spotter, for instance, also as an option goes into some of those. It is sad to see these go, but yeah, they kept the swarm for a very long time. But the future is now, old man, and these Cheska chests are going to a farm upstate. And that then brings us to this end of this rambly, as we went kind of long, rambly 4th character. Definitely, as we're going through, I'm noticing I'm getting more and more rambly, but I hope it is fine, as yeah, I'm hoping it is informative and enjoyable enough as we go through, and that my rambling is worth at least its time. So yeah, if you did enjoy it, please do any and all of the algorithm things below. That does help out, so I'll do that little bit of shilling here. In the future, we are, of course, still have character 5, which is my main character on 2nd account, which mostly actually is builds that I like. I basically take, they are mostly copies of a lot of the builds we've seen, at least as the saves. I'm just presenting them differently on the build collection. And because of that, yeah, they kind of have a smorgasbord of builds that I like. And that's actually the reason as well that I have that character and on the build collection as well, just to show some of the variants, but also it's basically a reinforcement of, hey, actually, if it's on character 5, I likely like the build quite a bit. And also, yeah, we're going to go do an retaliation only tips, following up this the modifier only tips we had just before this, of course. And then we are going to go and yeah, likely go back into making some toolbox videos and maybe even things and stuff in the future, as we kind of go back to going from in-depth looking into things, going back to just rambling quite a bit, and maybe doing some build showcases and doing some toolbox videos and some only tips on several subjects. So yeah, I hope you join me for those, and as always, have a good night.